I remember that fall vividly. It was the first time in my life I had ever truly been on my own. 27 years old, freshly unmoored from a long, painful breakup, I moved into a rental townhouse in a quiet pocket of southern Illinois. It wasn't glamorous or exciting, but I needed space. I needed silence. I thought being alone might help me clear the emotional debris. The townhouse itself was tucked into a small cul-de-sac, hidden just off a rural highway. A string of identical beige boxes lined up side by side, with perfectly clipped hedges and little wind chimes clinking in the breeze. The kind of place where neighbors wave, mow their lawns at the same time, and stencil their names on their mailboxes. Most were older folks, a few younger couples, but I didn't talk to anyone. That was how I preferred it. Still, there was one neighbor I couldn't ignore. He lived a few units down, a large man in his mid-40s, always in a worn-out flannel, with a beard that never looked intentional. From the very first night I noticed him. Not because he was loud, in fact the opposite. He just stood outside his house, late at night, sometimes pacing slowly across his porch, sometimes doing nothing at all. Just staring, I'd pull into my driveway after my late shift. And there he'd be, planted at the edge of his walkway, facing the road, not moving, not acknowledging me, just staring into the darkness like it spoke to him. I tried not to think much of it. Friends said maybe he had insomnia. My mum joked that he was probably just one of those weird but harmless night owls. But there was something wrong about the way he stood, perfectly still. No phone, no cigarette, no shifting weight. Just frozen in place like a sculpture cast in human skin. At first I dismissed the unease. I told myself I was being dramatic, that maybe I was projecting my own discomfort with solitude onto someone else. But that sense, that gut-level feeling, kept growing. Then came the first sound. It was sometime in mid-September. I'd gotten home from work, drained from the shift, ate something fast and passed out. It was around 2:30 in the morning when I was jolted awake by this scraping sound. Faint but distinct, metal against wood, slow and deliberate. I blinked into the dark room, heart pounding, trying to figure out if it had been a dream. Then it came again, a creak, like a rusty gate being pushed open. My bedroom was at the back of the unit with a sliding glass door leading to a fenced yard. The vertical blinds swayed slightly, and I could hear it, the crunch of footsteps over gravel. My backyard didn't have grass. It was lined with decorative stone, so every step echoed like it was meant to be heard. I grabbed my phone. My nightstand knife, a dull kitchen blade I kept there more for comfort than anything, felt pathetic in my hand. I crouched low, peering through the blinds. Nothing. No movement. The motion sensor light hadn't triggered, which meant either the person was out of range or knew exactly how to avoid it. I called the police, whispered into the receiver as the dispatcher kept me calm. Officers were on the way, they said. I stayed curled by the window, barely daring to breathe. After what felt like an hour, I saw red and blue lights blink across my living room wall. I met them at the door. It explained everything, the scraping, the steps. One officer checked the backyard while the other stayed with me. Eventually they regrouped. No signs of forced entry. Gate was closed, no footprints, no crime. One of them smirked and said it was probably just a raccoon. The subtext was clear. You're wasting our time. They left. I didn't sleep. Not even for a second. The next morning, I went outside myself. The gate was latched, but wedged beneath the bottom corner, barely visible, was a flat stone, smooth and palm-sized, just enough to keep the wooden gate from closing fully, just enough to allow someone to return silently. I picked up the stone and hurled it across the yard. I called the police again. They noted it, but again there was nothing they could do. No crime, no suspect, no threat. I asked if they could ask neighbors or check cameras. They declined. Nothing had technically happened, but I knew something had started. 2 nights later, the boundary cracked wider. I woke up again around 2 a.m. The back door handle was rattling, slowly at first. A soft click and jiggle like someone testing it. Then it grew more urgent. Someone was trying to open it. I sat up in bed, barely breathing, listening. I couldn't see anything through the blinds. but I felt it. Felt the presence. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers and called 911 again. While I waited, I crouched in the hallway out of sight, knife in hand. No dog, no alarm system, just me and that same knife, which suddenly felt even more useless than before. Then the motion light clicked on. Through the narrow slit in the blinds, I saw it, a shape, a man, broad shoulders, standing right at the door. He wasn't moving, wasn't trying to hide. He knew I could see him. When the officers arrived, they actually found prints in the gravel, deep ones, heading straight for the door. But again, no break-in, no attempt to enter. Just presence. Watching. Waiting. They promised more patrols. Told me to stay safe. Told me to lock my doors. That wasn't enough. The next morning I bought 2 Wi-Fi cameras and installed one at the back door, one at the front. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, watching the live feed on my phone. At exactly 2:23, Kempis, the back camera, triggered. The man appeared from the shadows. He moved confidently, like he knew exactly where to walk to avoid the motion sensor. He didn't trip it until he wanted to. He stepped into frame. Tall, wearing a black hoodie. Gloves? His face tilted up toward the camera, and he smiled, not a grin, not joy, just slow, stretched skin. Eyes hollow. Then he backed away into the dark. Still staring, I called the police, showed them the video. One of them actually looked disturbed. But again, no trespassing, no break-in, no weapons. Still nothing they could act on. I asked again. Would they check nearby cameras, ask around? No, they said. Not unless something worse happened, so I left. Packed a bag, booked a hotel, and didn't return until daylight. When I came back, there were handprints on the glass. Muddy. Too high. Too low. As if someone had crouched there watching, resting their hands as they stared. That was enough. I broke the lease. Hate the cost. Didn't care. On the day I left, I found a note tucked inside the mailbox, lined paper, handwritten, small, tight script. The cops go away. I don't. I gave it to the police. The officer who took the report actually seemed alarmed for the first time. Said they'd do a wellness check. Too late. I never returned. Weeks later, I got a Facebook message from a woman named Kayla. She said she'd moved into my old unit. Her message said, "Hey, sorry if this is weird. I think you used to live here. Did you ever see someone in a black hoodie hanging around the yard at night? I've been hearing footsteps. Last night someone knocked on the back door around 2. They just stood there." I never replied, because I already knew what she was hearing, and I didn't want to know how it ended. I work in a field most people don't think about. Property preservation. That's what we call it. We deal with foreclosed houses, securing them, emptying them out, sometimes winterizing the pipes or boarding up windows if they've been broken. It's not glamorous and it's not fun, but it pays well, and I've never minded solitude. Until that job. This happened in late 2020. I had been assigned to a small property in upstate New York. Remote area. One of those towns where half the buildings are boarded up, and the gas station looks like it hasn't been cleaned since the 90s. I arrived on a grey Monday morning with a small rental truck and my standard tools. The house was modest. 1 story, worn down but not falling apart. The vegetation had taken over the sides, vines swallowing the porch railings, and the dirt road leading to it felt like it hadn't been driven on in weeks. According to the documents, the house had been empty for over a year after the previous occupant, an elderly woman, had died. No one had stepped forward to claim the property. My job was simple: document the contents, clean it out, and lock it up for winter. When I pulled up, everything looked typical. Windows intact, doors closed, just the silence of isolation pressing against the truck's windshield. I walked up the porch, struggled with the front door. It had swollen in the frame. But once I forced it open, a rush of stale air hit me. Dust, dry rot, time itself. The interior looked like someone had just walked away one day and never came back. Furniture still in place, lace curtains yellowing in the windows, plastic flowers, in a vase long faded from sun exposure. Then my phone rang. It startled me because I already knew I had no service. I'd checked as soon as I got out of the truck. 0 bars. But the phone lit up anyway. No number, just unknown caller. I answered. Silence. Not dead silence. There was something. A faint static sound. No breathing, no voice. Just that. Low crackle, like a television tuned to a dead channel. After a few seconds, I said hello, got no response, and hung up. Figured it was a glitch. I got to work. My process is always the same. Photograph each room, log the contents, then box up, or discard what's left. I started with the living room. It had heavy old furniture, the kind your grandparents might own, and porcelain knickknacks on every surface. A large painting of a lake scene hung above the fireplace. The hallway smelled different. Not decay exactly. More like mildew and something faintly metallic like old coins. There were 3 bedrooms. One was almost empty except for a torn mattress on the floor. Another looked like it had once been a sewing room. Spools of thread were still on the wall rack, and a dusty machine sat in the corner. I stepped closer and noticed a bulletin board above the desk. It was covered in newspaper clippings, all of them obituaries, dozens of them, pinned in neat rows. Names, dates, black and white photos, strangers to me, all apparently local. I stared for a long time, unsure why it made me feel so uncomfortable. Then my phone rang again. Same thing. Unknown caller. I hesitated. Answered. Silence again. But this time, after about 5 seconds, I heard it. A whisper. So soft I almost thought I imagined it. Don't answer the phone in the bedroom. That's what it said. Then it disconnected. My mouth went dry. I looked around the hallway. Empty. Still. No noise. No movement. Just that same stale air pressing against me. I checked the front door. Still closed and locked. Tried to laugh it off. Maybe someone was playing a prank. But how? No one else even knew I was there that early, and I still didn't have reception. I tried to call my supervisor. The call wouldn't go through. Network failure. I shoved my phone in my pocket and decided to work faster. I boxed up some old books from the living room, kept glancing down the hallway. Something felt wrong, like the house was watching me back. Then I heard it. Not my cell phone, the rotary phone, from the master bedroom. It started ringing. That old off-white phone, the one I'd glanced at earlier on the nightstand, was now screaming through the house with its mechanical trill. It shouldn't have been working. The power and lines were both disconnected. I had tested them, but it rang anyway, not once or twice. It rang 8 times. I stood frozen in the hallway, phone still in hand, every instinct in my body screaming not to go into that room. Eventually, the ringing stopped. I didn't go in, not then, not ever again, but I wasn't done with the house. I still had to check the basement. It was protocol. I could have lied and said I completed it, but something compelled me to finish. Maybe pride, maybe fear of admitting I was afraid. I found the door in the kitchen. It groaned open. The stairs creaked as I descended, flashlight cutting across, cobwebs and old wooden shelves. The air was damp and metallic. Mold was heavy in the corners. Dust coated everything. Then I saw it, a small plastic table in the far corner. On it sat a cordless phone, a newer model, but just as lifeless looking as the rotary one upstairs. Next to it, a stack of notebooks. Picked one up, every page had the same structure. A name, a date, and a short sentence, Lena H. up July 3rd. Rang once, no answer. Carl M.I.C. September 12th. Picked up, warned him. Dozens of these entries, carefully written in the same cramped handwriting. I dropped the book and backed away. Something was wrong in that house, beyond logic, beyond coincidence. I felt eyes on me, not just from behind, from all around. I ran, back up the stairs, 2 steps at a time, slammed the basement door and locked it behind me, loaded my truck and left without completing the inventory. At the office, I submitted the report, just said the site was unsafe. Mentioned possible squatters, didn't include the phones or the voice. 2 days later, I got a text from a guy I worked with, Mark. He had taken the reassignment and gone to finish what I started. His message said, "That phone in the bedroom rang, the one with no line." "What the hell, man?" I called him immediately. He answered, said he hadn't touched the phone, said it started ringing while he was cataloging the closet, said he left early. The next day, Mark quit the job without saying goodbye. I looked him up later. He's still around. Posted pictures of a fishing trip a few months ago. Never mentioned that house again, neither did I. My boss eventually sent in another team. No incidents reported, but I've never stopped thinking about it. That whisper, the notebooks, the timing, someone or something had been logging interactions, calling people, watching reactions. And when I think about the fact that my phone rang the first time before I'd even stepped into that bedroom, I wonder if the house knew I was coming. This happened back in 2019, during a period of my life where I thought I was finally settling down. I was in my late 20s and had just signed a lease for a small rental home on the far edge of a quiet town. It wasn't impressive or modern, just a plain one-story place with creaking floors, outdated wiring and a patchy backyard. But it was cheap, and more importantly, it had a basement, which I figured would be perfect for storage. I moved in during the spring, and the first few months passed without anything strange. The house had character, sure. The pipes clanged when I used the shower, and one kitchen cabinet had a mind of its own and always swung open an hour after being shut. But that was normal for older homes. Nothing that ever made me feel unsafe, except the basement. The door to it was in the hallway right next to the bathroom. It was a solid, heavy thing that stuck in the frame when you pulled it open, and the weirdest part was the light switch. It was halfway down the stairs. That meant you had to walk into complete darkness, 3 or 4 steps in before you could even reach it. I didn't go down there often, just once when I moved in, to set up shelves and stack up extra boxes and furniture I didn't need. That first time, I remember feeling off. Not scared, not really, but uncomfortable. The way the shadows seemed to stay still, even when I moved my flashlight, the way the air felt thicker than upstairs. I told myself it was just the smell of damp wood. Then October rolled around. It was a Thursday. I'd gotten home from work late. I was on night shift security at the time, and as usual I was winding down around 3 a.m., just heading to the bathroom before bed. That's when I heard it. A knocking sound, not loud, not fast, just 3 soft taps. It came from behind the basement door. I stood still, toothbrush in hand, trying to convince myself it was the plumbing, or maybe the wind outside. But then I heard it again, clear. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, knuckle against wood. I stepped back. My eyes locked on that door. I waited. Silence, I whispered out loud, just to break the tension. It's just the house. Even though I didn't believe it, I didn't open the door. I went to my room, locked the door, and stayed awake with the TV on, every creak of the floorboards making my skin crawl. The next morning, I forced myself to go down there. I needed to know. I opened the door, flipped on the light, and descended the stairs. Everything looked untouched. Dust settled on the boxes the same way I'd left it. Nothing out of place, no broken windows, no footprints, no signs of entry. I tried to believe it was just in my head, but a few nights later it happened again. This time I was brushing my teeth again. Different night, same time, around 3 a.m., but instead of soft tapping, it was just one knock. Heavy, sharp, like a closed fist slammed against the door. I turned off the sink, opened the bathroom door, and looked into the hallway. The basement door was shut. Nothing moved. The air was silent. I walked up to it and placed my ear against the wood. At first, there was nothing. Then I heard breathing, faint, steady, as if someone stood just inches on the other side of the door. Not moving, not speaking, just existing. I backed away slowly. That night, I called my landlord. I told him something was off, that I suspected maybe someone had broken in and maybe hiding down there. He didn't seem convinced, but agreed to check the place out the next day. When he arrived, we both went down, together. We searched the corners, the windows, the vents. Nothing, no damage, no sign of anyone being there. He gave me a strange look before leaving, the kind people give when they're wondering if you're mentally okay. I didn't blame him. I tried to put it behind me. Convinced myself that I was just overtired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. And then the door opened. It was around 2 a.m., a week later. I was watching something on TV when I heard it. A soft, slow creaking. Wood dragging over the frame. turned the volume down and sat upright. The hallway was dim, but I could see it from where I sat. The basement door was open, not cracked, wide open. I stared, frozen. I hadn't touched that door in over a week. Hadn't even gone near it. I grabbed a flashlight. No weapons in the house, just me and the growing sense of dread in my chest. I walked down the hall, slowly. I stood at the top of the stairs and aimed the light downward, pitch black. The bulb didn't. Come on. I reached around the corner, fumbled for the switch, clicked it once, twice, nothing. Burnt out? Maybe. But the timing felt wrong. That's when I heard them. Footsteps, coming up the stairs, not rushing, not sneaky. Just slow, deliberate steps. Rising one at a time, I backed away, slammed the door shut. Felt something on the other side, pressure. Like someone pressing back just enough to resist. Then it was gone. I locked it, called the police, told them someone was inside. They showed up quickly. 2 officers. They searched the place, went down into the basement, guns drawn. They came back, up a few minutes later, said it was clear. No signs of forced entry, nothing disturbed. One of them joked about late-night horror movies. I didn't laugh. After they left, I stood outside for a long time, staring at the house like it wasn't mine. Eventually, I went back inside, double-locked every door, checked every window, didn't sleep. The next morning, I bought a padlock and drilled it into the basement door. It wasn't in the lease agreement. I didn't care. Weeks passed, nothing happened. The padlock stayed in place, no knocking, no creaking. I started to breathe normally again. Then one night I came home, and the door was open, not just unlocked. The padlock was broken, lying on the floor like it had been snapped. The door itself was ajar, just enough to see the blackness beyond. I didn't go near it. I turned and walked straight back outside. Slept at a friend's place for 3 days. When I returned, I brought nails. I boarded the door shut from the outside, hammered it in, moved a chair against it. I didn't care if it was allowed. I couldn't look at that entrance again. But the house wasn't finished. One night, around 3 in the morning, I was lying, in bed, exhausted but too wired to sleep, when I heard it. A sound that froze my blood. A voice. Not words. Not even a whisper. Just vocal vibration, like the soft, involuntary hum of someone standing in the dark beneath your floorboards, lost in their own murmur. It came from below me, directly beneath the bed. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I called. The police one last time. They searched again, found nothing. The basement was sealed, untouched, but still empty. I packed what I could, left everything else, didn't even clean. I never finished the lease. I still think about it sometimes, the knocking, the breath, the voice. And I wonder, what would have happened if I'd waited just a little longer? What was coming up those stairs? Even now, in the quiet moments just before sleep, when everything else fades into the dark, I find myself drifting back to that house. Not by choice. It pulls me in, like a memory that's not mine, like something is still waiting. After I left, I moved into a small apartment closer to the city. Top floor, no basement, bright windows, neighbors on every side. I told myself I needed the noise, the closeness, the normality of it all. But I was wrong, because what happened in that house didn't stay there. Not entirely. It wasn't immediate. For a while, things were fine. I started sleeping through the night again, got a new job, tried dating. I told myself that the fear had passed, that it was just stress and shadows, nothing more. But then came the dream. I don't even know if it started as a dream. I was lying in bed, the new place, soft light from a street lamp pouring in through the blinds. I felt safe, but something pulled at me, a sound, faint, a low rhythmic tapping. I opened my eyes, and I was back in the hallway. Not my hallway, the old one. Standing in front of the basement door, the padlock broken, the chair kicked to the side, and the door was open, wider this time, pitch black inside. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, just stood there as the cold air from the basement crawled up the stairs and wrapped around my legs. Then, footsteps, one after another. Not fast, deliberate, coming toward me. And that's when I woke up, soaked in sweat, gasping, like I'd been drowning. I checked the clock at 3:17 a.m., the exact time the voice had hummed beneath my bed. I got up, walked around the apartment, checked every corner. No sign of anything unusual, but I couldn't shake it. Over the next few nights, the dream repeated. Not always the same, but close. Sometimes I'd be in the basement, flashlight dying. Sometimes I'd hear my name whispered behind the furnace. Sometimes it was just silence, but with the overwhelming feeling that I was being watched from every angle. I started sleeping with the lights on. I bought a white noise machine, installed extra locks, left the TV running all night. Nothing helped. Then something happened that I couldn't explain away. I came home late one night, around 2 a.m., and found my front door slightly open. I live alone. I always double-check that lock. But it wasn't broken, just open. I stepped inside cautiously. Everything looked the same, nothing missing, nothing out of place, but the bathroom mirror had fog on it, like someone had taken a shower recently, and on the counter, something that hadn't been there before. A small, smooth stone, palm-sized, flat, identical to the one I had found wedged under the gate back at the townhouse. I picked it up. It was still damp. That was the first time I genuinely considered leaving again, starting over, disappearing. But I didn't. I stayed. I don't know why. Maybe I was tired of running. Maybe I didn't want to believe that something had followed me. But the signs kept piling up. Footsteps in the hallway while I slept. Shadows on. The wall that didn't match anything in the room. A voicemail on my phone. Silent for the first 20 seconds. Then breathing. Not heavy, just there. As if someone wanted me to know they were close but not say anything more. I played it for a friend. He said it was probably just a butt dial, but he didn't look me in the eye when he said it. I stopped inviting people over, started sleeping with a knife under the pillow again, and every time I walked down the hall toward the bathroom, that same stretch of hallway layout from the old place, I felt like the walls were getting closer, like the door at the end would be open again. Then one night I dreamed of the basement again, but this time I went inside. I descended the stairs one by one, each creaking louder than the last. The air was freezing. The shadows moved on their own. And in the far corner where the old paint cans had been, there was someone sitting, knees to chest, head down, breathing slow. When I stepped closer, they raised their head, and it was me. Same face, same eyes, but hollow, as if something had been scooped out and replaced with something else. I woke up screaming. That night I started packing, didn't even wait for the sun to rise, left most of my furniture behind, moved across state lines. Got a new phone number, a new job. Didn't tell anyone where I went. I thought I could outrun it. I was wrong. 3 weeks into the new place, I found a note on my windshield. Lined paper. Handwritten. Same cramped, scratchy letters as before. You. Left again. I didn't. No return address, no fingerprints, just that. Since then, I've stopped trying to rationalize. I don't try to explain it to others. Because how do you explain something that lives between walls, in the air, in the silence, between knocks? How do you tell someone that you're being haunted by a house that isn't even there anymore? Some nights I still hear the knocking. 3 taps, always 3. Sometimes it's on the wall behind my bed, sometimes from the ceiling. Once, it came. From inside my closet. I don't answer. I don't look because deep down I know. If I open the door again, any door, I won't be the one who walks through. Something else will. I don't talk about it anymore. Not with friends, not with family, not even in therapy. People like clean answers, explanations, timelines. But what happened to me never followed those rules. There was no origin point. No clear break between normal and not. No dramatic climax that resolved anything. Only this slow, silent unraveling. The sense that something had noticed me once and never stopped. Even after the last move, I kept feeling it. A hum behind the walls, a breath behind my shoulder, a pressure in the room when everything else was still, but nothing obvious. Nothing I could record or measure. Just the persistent feeling that I wasn't alone no matter where I went. I tried rituals, sage, Salt, cleansing the air with smoke, like people say to do when they feel haunted. I even spoke out loud one night. If you're here, I need you to leave. The lights flickered. Just once I told myself it was coincidence, but I unplugged every lamp after that. I changed my routines, woke up earlier, slept in bursts, kept music playing softly in the background, always. The silence had started to feel hostile. Then came the knock, not a memory, not a dream. I was wide awake watching TV in the living room of my newest apartment, a clean, modern unit with no history. A building less than 10 years old, and yet at exactly 3 in the morning I heard it. 3 slow taps, not on the door, on the inside of the bedroom wall, the wall that backed up against the hallway. A spot with no pipes, no wiring, no logical explanation. I muted the TV, listened. Nothing else came, but I couldn't shake it. That precise rhythm. 3 beats, always 3. I stayed up all night, knife in hand, but nothing else happened. The next day, I called maintenance and asked if any pipes ran through that part of the wall. They said no, offered to come look. I declined. I didn't want anyone else involved. This thing, whatever it was, had already stretched across too many places, too many states. It didn't need a location. It needed me. That was the terrifying realization. It had stopped being about the house a long time ago. It was about proximity, presence, the echo of fear. It fed on patterns, on repetition, on doors that were meant to stay shut being opened again and again. The dreams returned, always variations of the same scene, me walking down unfamiliar stairs, the light always broken, the air always colder the deeper I went, and something waiting at the bottom, out of view, never speaking, never moving, but there aware. When I'd wake up, my phone would be on unlocked, on a blank screen, like someone had tried to type a message and stopped halfway. I started filming myself at night, just to be sure. Nothing ever moved in the footage. No shadows, no voices. But sometimes the audio would pick up a static buzz, the same low crackle I'd heard in that first abandoned house years ago, the one that rang my phone with no signal, the one that whispered to me from a line that shouldn't have worked. I bought a new phone, switched providers, left the camera unplugged. Didn't matter. The buzzing continued. I began cataloging these events in a notebook, not for proof, not to share. Just to keep track. Over time I noticed something unsettling. The dates aligned, not to my schedule, to theirs. Every 3 months, always between the 15th and the 21st, something happened. A knock, a shadow, a dream that ended at the same point. Me standing at the foot of stairs I didn't recognize, heart racing, something unseen about to step forward. Once, during one of those periods, I got a call at work, blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. When I played it back, it was just a whisper. "You're not done." That was all. That same week, a letter arrived. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a photocopy of one of my own journal pages, the one where I'd written down the names from the notebook I found in the basement. Only this time, my name was added. At the bottom, same handwriting, same ink. I stopped writing after that, burned the notebook, but it didn't stop anything. That's when I realized the truth. This wasn't about haunting. It wasn't about ghosts or houses or cursed objects. It was about memory, some things. Once remembered, do not let go. They become part of your structure, your inner architecture, like bones buried in the foundation. No amount of distance or denial changes the fact that they're there, living beneath the floorboards, breathing through. The walls, and now I've come to accept it. There's a rhythm to this. 3 months on, 3 months off, a game of patience, of waiting, of watching how close I get to the edge before I look down. There are times, rare ones, when I think maybe it's over, that whatever held on to me has finally let go. Then I'll wake up and the TV will be on, even though I never turned it on, or the faucet in the kitchen will be dripping. A slow, deliberate beat, 3 drops at a time, or I'll find the closet door open, though I always shut it before bed. Just enough to see the dark, to feel the chill, and I'll remember that night, that house, that basement, and the voice, not the words, but the weight behind them. the intention, the message that's always the same no matter how it's delivered. I don't leave, so I keep moving, not to escape, but to delay. I stay awake as long as I can. I don't answer calls from unknown numbers. I don't open doors that weren't open when I left the room. And if you're hearing this, and if you've ever felt it too, the breath, the knock, the cold, you already know what comes next. I met Matt on one of those hot, restless summer nights where you're not really looking for anything meaningful. Just a beer, some noise, and a few hours of distraction. We crossed paths at a bar while I was out with a group of friends, half distracted, by the Cubs game on the TV above the counter. He and I started talking, bonding over baseball and cheap drinks. It was easy, effortless, one of those quick male friendships that forms when the beer is flowing and no one's thinking too hard. When the group I came with scattered, I didn't really notice. Matt and I kept talking, laughing about some outfielders' stats and trading harmless jabs like we'd known each other for years. Eventually, we exchanged Instagrams. His profile looked normal, lots of outdoorsy shots, selfies at breweries, travel pics, the kind of curated mess that screams, "I'm a chill dude." I figured that would be it. Most bar friendships disappear after the buzz wears off. You tell yourself you'll hang out again, but it never happens. Except the very next day I saw him again. I was out at a waterside bar for my friend Tyler's birthday. We'd just finished dinner, and the night had that lazy, floating energy where people are tipsy and waiting for something to happen. I'd posted a quick story on Instagram of us singing to Tyler, and not an hour later someone tapped my shoulder. It was Matt. He smiled like we were old friends and said, "This is my spot on Saturday nights." I introduced him to the group, again pretending like he was already part of our world. He slid in easily, like he'd always been there. Everyone was too drunk to notice how odd it was that he'd appeared out of nowhere. After that, he kept popping up. We went golfing the following weekend. Just the two of us. I tried to bring friends, but nobody was up for it. Matt didn't mind I sucked at golf, but he didn't care. We played 9 holes in the heat, then grabbed food. He was smooth like that, always offering plans, always chill. Then came the trip. Matt invited me to go hiking in Arizona, Grand Canyon territory. It had always been on my bucket list. He said he was going solo and figured I might want to come. I checked with work and confirmed the dates. My usual crew passed on it. Money, schedules, the usual excuses. I asked if any of Matt's friends were joining, but he said he preferred solo trips. Weird, maybe, but believable. His Instagram painted him as the kind of guy who had a lot of connections but didn't need them. We flew out on August 15th, landed late. Matt had rented a car, and on the drive to our Airbnb, we stopped for groceries and beer. By the time we arrived, it was close to midnight. The place was clean, minimal, 1 bed. I hadn't thought to ask about sleeping arrangements, but Matt pointed to the couch and said, "Pull out, you're good." And he added, "Don't worry, I'm not charging you for the stay." It felt generous, maybe too generous. I didn't overthink it. I set up the couch bed and knocked out. In the middle of the night, I stirred. Matt was walking to the kitchen. I didn't move, just watched him glide past. He didn't look at me, just moved like someone on autopilot, got a glass of water and went back into his room. I rolled over and went back to sleep. The next morning, we hit the Grand Canyon. Bright Angel Trail. Stunning, endless views. Matt was a machine, hiking without breaking a sweat, snapping photos, pushing the pace. I was gasping like an out-of-shape idiot, but he didn't tease me. He just smiled and told me to keep up. We hiked for hours, stopped for food on the way. Back to Phoenix, napped at the Airbnb. Then, of course, bar hopped until late. That night I got obliterated. Matt drank just as much, maybe more, but he didn't stumble, didn't slur. He was still sharp while I was melting. We Ubered home, left the rental on the street. I remember plugging in my phone by the couch and then nothing, just darkness. Until I woke up, sometime around 3 a.m., thirsty, full bladder. I staggered toward the bathroom, heard a sound. A creak, wood under pressure. I paused, scanned the room. Nothing. I kept walking. Midstream in the bathroom, I heard another noise, a door closing gently. Matt's room. When I got out, I knocked on his door. No answer. It was locked. Weird, but I shrugged it off, too tired to care. I collapsed back on the couch and fell asleep. When I woke up, my phone wasn't where I left it. It had been charging on the floor beside me, but now it was sitting upright on the table, unplugged. I told myself I moved it while drunk. But something about it felt off. We didn't hike that day. Just drove around, checked out the botanical gardens. I was hungover and quiet. Matt was still laid back, still suggesting drinks. By nightfall, we were drunk again. Back at the Airbnb, he insisted I take the bed. Said it was fair since he'd used it the night before. I didn't argue. I took my bag, went into the room and shut the door. Didn't lock it. The lock was just a twist knob, easy to bypass. Pointless. I should have locked it anyway. I woke up to silence. One of those wake-ups where something disturbs you, but you don't remember the disturbance. I sat up, looked for my phone, gone again. I'd left it charging beside me. The cord was still there, dangling like a tail, but the phone was gone. I leaned over the bed and screamed. Matt was lying on the floor, face down, sprawled out. He lifted his head. Slowly dazed, I shouted, "What the hell are you doing?" He looked confused, said he must have been blackout drunk. Said he wandered into the room, realized I was in the bed, and passed out on the floor. But he was on the far side of the bed, away from the door. It didn't make sense. I asked him where my phone was. He looked around like he didn't know. Said, "To check under the bed." Then immediately, "Oh, here it is," and pulled it out too fast, too convenient. I stared at him and felt something shift, something dark. I told him I'd sleep on the couch. He insisted he would. Eventually, he left this room. This time, I locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding my phone, wondering what he had tried to access, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't woken up. I fell asleep with the door locked and the covers pulled tight around me. But it didn't end there. I woke up one last time. This time, I saw it clearly. Matt, standing at the foot of the bed, just standing. His silhouette outlined by the faint light seeping under the door. He didn't move, didn't speak. He sat down on the bed and started rubbing my foot. I screamed, pushed him, shoved him off the mattress and out the door. He didn't resist, didn't speak. Just sat on the couch, upright, staring forward, like he wasn't even real anymore. I packed my things, quick, panicked movements. He didn't stop me, just watched me like I was a show. I called an Uber and left for the airport before the sun rose. He never said a word. On the flight home, I changed seats, paid extra to avoid sitting near him. I stared out the window the whole time, didn't speak to anyone until I landed. After Arizona, I blocked Matt on everything, number, Instagram, the works. But even then, I couldn't escape the lingering sense that something had crossed a boundary, not just between him and me, but between me and the world itself. Something, invisible but now present, watching. A few weeks later, I found one of his older Instagram posts, a group picture with friends. No one was tagged. But I zoomed into the comments and found one from a guy who looked like he was in the photo. Out of curiosity, I clicked his profile. Matt wasn't following him. He wasn't following Matt either. Something about that bothered me more than it should have. I sent the guy a message, just a short one. "Are you still friends with Matt?" 10 minutes later, he replied, "Nah, dude's a freak, run." His words were direct, too direct. He told me stories about Matt, about how he'd crossed boundaries with others too, about how no one from their group speaks to him anymore, how some had tried to warn others but gave up. One line stuck with me. He should be in jail. I didn't respond. What could I say? For weeks after that, I couldn't sleep right. Every sound at night felt amplified. Every creak in my apartment floor made my breath catch. I'd wake up thinking someone had opened the door. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow again. That was when Kyle reached out to me. We'd gone to college together, drifted apart, but he messaged me after seeing something I posted, something vague about trust, about being watched. He asked if I was okay. I didn't say much. Just hinted. That was when he told me about what happened to him, about Ocean City, about the man on the beach. Kyle had grown up in Maryland, and every summer he went back to his coastal town between semesters. That summer, he, Jason, and Marcus, his two closest friends, planned a short trip to Ocean City to reconnect. Jason's family owned a small beach house, old but functional. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that smelled like sunscreen and salt. Classic stuff. They spent the first day walking the boardwalk, messing around in arcades, watching tourists sweat under umbrellas. That night, they drank and decided to go back to the beach. Kyle told me there's something eerie about the beach after dark. The waves sound different. The wind feels sharper. The sand reflects the moonlight in a way that flattens everything. They didn't bring much, just hoodies and a flashlight. They walked along the shoreline, letting the cold surf kiss their ankles, talking about college girls' life. Then they stopped near a lifeguard tower and laid back on the sand. That's when Jason sat up. He pointed toward the shoreline. There was someone walking there, a silhouette. At first it seemed normal. Just someone, walking alone. But the way they moved, Kyle said it was wrong, too rigid, too smooth, like their joints didn't quite work. Their head was angled down, scanning the sand as they moved. They watched him in silence. Then the figure stopped, stood still, closer now, and they just watched. Jason whispered, "He's looking at you, Kyle." Kyle thought it was a joke, until Jason flicked on the flashlight. For a second the beam hit him, pale skin, shirtless, wet jeans sticking to his legs. His head tilted unnaturally, eyes bulging, lips parted slightly. Then he ran straight at them, full sprint, no warning, just silence, then speed. They screamed and ran, didn't look back, didn't stop until they were off the beach and onto the pavement. No footprints followed them, nothing. They didn't sleep that night, and in the days that followed, something stranger began. Kyle and Jason both had the same dream. The man. In the corner of the room, standing, soaking wet, head tilted, silent, no movement, no breath, just presence. Then came the story from the boat. This one wasn't mine or Kyle's. It was told by someone else I spoke to on a forum, someone who had messaged me after I anonymously posted about Matt. He called himself Blake. Blake grew up in Massachusetts. Every summer he and his friends would party on the water, boats, beer, late-night drifts into the fog. He and his friend Emerson had taken a boat out one evening, found a calm inlet, dropped anchor, started drinking. Other boats nearby played music. Then they started leaving. Eventually it was just one other boat. Emerson noticed it first. The figures, 3 people, standing at the edge. Silent, backlit, by their own deck lights. Just watching, Blake thought it was funny, yelled at them through a megaphone, tried to joke, but Emerson wasn't laughing. Then 2 splashes, only one silhouette remained. They started pulling the anchor. Blake was still laughing, until he heard water splashing behind them, someone trying to climb aboard. One hand, then another. He turned on the engine, panicked and slammed into a sandbar. They reversed hard, sped into open water, but the boat behind them followed, fast, too fast. Blake swerved, tried to lose them. Eventually the boat peeled off, but they never saw the faces. And the next night, he had a dream. 3 people, standing on the edge of his bed, soaked, watching, no words. I've collected these stories for almost a year now, not because I wanted to, because they came to me, unprompted. People finding me, messaging me, saying they felt something too, that someone followed them, that they'd lost something they couldn't describe. The more I tried to forget Matt, the more I remembered others. And now I wonder, was it ever about him, or was he just one of them? A vessel, an echo, a pattern wearing a human face. I still wake, up at 3 a.m., still check the door locks twice before bed, still dream of phones ringing in dead houses, and sometimes I dream of stairs that lead downward endlessly, and I know deep in my chest what waits at the bottom. It's not a man, not a ghost. It's the truth behind all these stories. A thing with no name that passes from face to face, waiting for someone alone, drunk, vulnerable, willing to trust, and when it finds them, it never really leaves. It happened almost a decade ago, but I can still see it clearly when I close my eyes. I was 22. My friend Matt had just moved to Arizona. He was excited about the outdoors, hiking, and photography. I hadn't seen him in a while when he invited me out for a visit, said he found something I had to see, something in the desert. He called it an untouched piece of the Grand Canyon. I didn't really understand what he meant by that. The Grand Canyon wasn't exactly a hidden gem, but Matt sounded different. Obsessive, even. So I flew out to see him. I should have known something was wrong the moment I arrived. He wasn't at the airport to pick me up. I waited for over an hour. My calls went straight to voicemail. Finally, I grabbed a taxi to his apartment. The driver dropped me off in front of a worn, tan complex baked in the Arizona sun. When I knocked, Matt opened the door, smiling like nothing was wrong. "Hey man," he said casually, "sorry I wasn't there. I got a little sidetracked." He looked tired, really tired, and thinner than I remembered. Inside, the place was a mess. Not dirty exactly, more like chaotic. Maps, printed satellite images, hand-drawn sketches pinned to the walls. Half a dozen notebooks, open with scribbles and coordinates. The table was covered in GPS gear, hiking supplies, water bottles. He handed me a beer and started talking about the spot. Said it wasn't on any maps, that he'd found it by accident, following an old trail from the Navajo reservation. He said he'd seen structures, maybe ancient dwellings, built into the side of a canyon wall. "I don't think anyone's been out there in a long time," he told me, eyes wide. I laughed, thinking he was exaggerating. He didn't laugh back. The next morning we left before sunrise. We drove northeast in Matt's old Jeep, past Flagstaff, then off-road through scrubby desert for miles. There were no signs, no trail markers, just dust and stone. After about 4 hours, he stopped the car. "This is it," he said. I looked around. Nothing but open land and distant cliffs. It didn't look like much, but we loaded our gear and started walking. Matt moved fast, like he knew exactly where we were going. I struggled to keep up. After a couple hours of silence, he finally stopped at the edge of a shallow canyon. "There," he whispered, pointing down. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed, carved into the rock face about halfway, down, a dark rectangular shape. It was a doorway, too perfect to be natural. We climbed down carefully, scrambling over loose stones and ledges. It took us nearly 30 minutes to reach the ledge just below the doorway. Up close, it was even stranger. The doorway was tall, maybe 7 feet, and completely black inside. No markings, no symbols, just darkness. Matt pulled out a flashlight and stepped inside. I hesitated. Something about the air. It was cooler. Still, like it didn't belong in the middle of a desert. But I followed him. The passage led straight back about 20 feet, then opened into a chamber. The walls were smooth, unnaturally so, as if polished. And in the center of the chamber, there was a stone platform. Matt walked straight to it, reverent, like he was approaching an altar. "This wasn't built by the Navajo," he said quietly. "This is older, way older." I asked how he knew. He didn't answer. We camped just outside the canyon that night. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that room, that impossible darkness, that platform. At some point during the night, I heard Matt get up and walk away from the camp. I sat up, calling his name, no answer. I waited, expecting him to return. He didn't. After 10 minutes, I grabbed my flashlight and followed his tracks. They led straight back to the doorway. When I stepped inside, the chamber was empty. Matt was gone. I called for him. I shouted, "Nothing." Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before, another passage, geeky narrower, at the back of the chamber. I squeezed through, calling his name again. The air changed. It smelled stale, like rot and dust. The tunnel wound down, into the earth, getting tighter as it descended. Finally, I found him. He was standing still in front of a wall. I touched his shoulder. He didn't move, just stared. Then he whispered, "Do you see it?" I looked at the wall. There were marks now, symbols, but they were shifting, changing, like they were alive. I blinked. They were gone. I pulled Matt out of there. We didn't speak on the way back. The next day, he told me he was going back, alone. I begged him not to. Told him it wasn't safe. He didn't listen. That was the last time I saw him. A week later, I got a call from the park rangers. They found his Jeep, empty, no sign of him, no footprints, nothing. They searched for days. Eventually they gave up, declared him missing, presumed dead. But I know he's not dead, because 3 nights ago, I saw him standing outside my apartment window. Same face, same eyes, but older, wrong. Like something else was looking through him. He didn't knock, he didn't speak. He just stared. Then he turned and walked away. I didn't sleep after I saw him. I tried to tell myself it wasn't real, that maybe I was hallucinating, stress maybe, a bad dream. But I knew better. He'd come back, or something had. The next morning I checked the hallway cameras in my building. There was nothing. No record of anyone outside my apartment. No one matching his description in the footage. Just silence. I kept the blinds closed, my lights on. I started sleeping with the TV on, the volume low, just enough to muffle the silence. Then the messages started. They came at night, voicemails, always from an unknown number. The voice was distorted, barely recognizable, but I knew it was him, or at least something trying to sound like him. You left me down there. I see everything now. It's not a place, it's a door. I deleted them, but they kept coming, always the same voice, always the same tone. Calm, cold, like it wasn't even human anymore. Eventually, I stopped leaving the apartment. I called in sick to work, turned off my phone, didn't answer the door. But even then, I couldn't escape it. The dreams started, and they were worse than anything I'd experienced awake. In the dreams, I was back in the canyon, standing in that chamber, the symbols on the wall pulsing like veins, the stone platform glowing faintly, and Matt, standing in the darkness, whispering something I could never quite hear. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, the echo of his voice still in my ears. One night, I dreamt I followed him again, down the tunnel. But this time, it didn't end at a wall. It opened into something else, a void. Not just darkness, absence, like nothing had ever existed there. And I stepped in. That's when I always woke up, until I didn't. There was one night I didn't wake up. I stayed in the dream, or maybe it wasn't a dream anymore. I couldn't tell. I walked through the void, blind, weightless. There was no sound, no time. And then, a whisper. You were supposed to stay. I turned. There was something behind me. Not Matt. Not exactly. A figure in the shape of him, but hollow, as if the body had been filled with something else, something old. You brought it back with you, it said. I tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Just endless black. When I finally woke up, I was on the floor, bleeding from my nose, my hands shaking. I knew I had to go back. Not for Matt, for me, because whatever had followed me out of that canyon, it wasn't finished, and neither was I. I packed a bag. Same gear as before, flashlights, rope, first aid. I didn't tell anyone. I drove all night. The roads were quieter than I remembered, the air heavier, like the desert itself was waiting. When I reached the trailhead, the sun was just beginning to rise. I stood at the edge of the canyon and listened. No wind, no birds, just silence. I climbed down. The entrance was still there. Same doorway, same impossibly dark interior. I stood at the threshold, breathing deeply. Then I stepped inside. The passage hadn't changed. 20 feet straight back. Then the chamber. But something felt different. The air was colder, the walls damp. There was a sound now, a low hum, barely audible, like the stone itself was vibrating. The platform was still there. But now there were markings around it, circular, like a ritual. Symbols I'd never seen before. Or maybe I had. In the dreams. I approached slowly. The hum grew louder. I touched the platform. A flash. Images. The void. The figure. Matt. The wall. The whisper. You shouldn't have come alone. My flashlight flickered, then died. I was in complete darkness, and I wasn't alone. Something moved behind me. Not footsteps, not breathing, a presence. Cold, aware. "You left the door open," it said. I turned, but there was nothing, only the hum, only the dark, and the feeling that I'd just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I sat on the floor trying to slow my heartbeat. I didn't move, couldn't move. Then faintly I saw it. The wall, the one Matt had stared at, now glowing, symbols shifting. I stood and approached. As I got closer, the hum grew unbearable. My head throbbed, my eyes watered, but I couldn't stop. I touched the wall, and everything went white. When the light faded, I was no longer in the chamber. I was standing in a desert, but it wasn't the same one. The colors were wrong. The sky had no sun, just a dim glow, like twilight stretched forever. The sand under my feet pulsed faintly, like it had a heartbeat, and there were structures in the distance, not buildings, not human, like the bones of something long dead, protruding from the earth. I walked, not knowing where I was going. There were no sounds, no wind, no insects. Just the steady thump of that invisible heartbeat through the ground. Eventually I reached the edge of a cliff, and below, an ocean of eyes, thousands of them, blinking slowly, watching nothing and everything all at once, and in the center, the figure, Matt, or the thing wearing Matt. It stood atop a pillar of stone, arms outstretched as if in offering. Then it looked up at me and smiled, not with lips or teeth, but with something inside my mind. "So you see it now," it said. "You always did." I stepped back, but the ground gave way and I fell down through the eyes, through the pulse, through memory. I woke up gasping, back in the chamber, alone. My watch said 6 minutes had passed. 6, but it felt like days, maybe longer. I staggered out of the doorway into the harsh desert sun, but something was wrong. The air smelled different, like smoke. The sky was darker. I climbed out of the canyon, my legs weak, my breath shallow. When I reached the top, I stopped cold. The jeep was gone, so were the tire tracks, even my footprints, like I'd never been there. I walked for hours trying to find the road. Nothing. The terrain was unfamiliar. Landmarks. Gone. The sun didn't move, time didn't move. Finally I collapsed, and when I opened my eyes again, I was in my apartment, sitting on the floor. The blinds closed, TV static hissing in the background, a bloody rag in my hand. No memory of how I got there, no messages, no calls, just silence. But the dreams didn't stop, and sometimes in the static of the TV, I see the desert, I see the eyes, and I hear the hum. I'm not sure I ever left or if I'm even me anymore. The days blurred. I stopped checking the clock, stopped opening the blinds. I couldn't tell if it was day or night anymore. Sleep didn't come naturally. When it did, it dragged me under like an undertow, straight back into the canyon. Didn't fight it. I let it pull me deeper. Each time I returned, the landscape had changed. It grew more intricate, less like a memory and more like a designed maze, as if something was building it, piece by piece, using my thoughts as scaffolding. Sometimes I saw other people there, not strangers, people I'd known, faces from childhood, teachers, neighbors, people who disappeared without explanation. They wandered aimlessly, muttering phrases I couldn't understand, their eyes vacant. One of them, a woman I vaguely remembered from high school, looked directly at me. "You opened the wrong door," she whispered. Then she vanished. I started writing everything down, the symbols, the phrases, the geography of the dream place, trying to map it, decode it. But every night the layout changed. My diagrams turned to nonsense. And then something new. A voice. Not Matt's. Deeper. Older. It didn't speak words, not exactly. It imposed thoughts, feelings, like emotion made sound. "You are the echo," it said, "not the source." One night I woke to find my walls covered in symbols, carved, not drawn, fresh stone dust on the floor. I don't remember doing it, but my hands were bloody, my fingernails split. It wasn't a dream. The next day I tried. To leave my apartment I couldn't. The door wouldn't open, not locked, just sealed. Like the frame had melted into the wall. The windows wouldn't break. No one outside could hear me. I screamed for hours. Then the hum came back. Low, constant. It vibrated in my spine, in my teeth. And I remembered what Matt had said before he vanished. It's not a place, it's a door. And I'd left it open, I realized then. This wasn't about Matt. It never had been. He was the first to step through, but I was the one who brought it back. The hum grew louder. The symbols on the walls began to glow. Not bright, just enough to outline their shapes in sickly red. Then came the shadow. It rose from the floor, slow and fluid. Humanoid but wrong, its head tilted at an impossible angle, its arms too long. It didn't walk. It slid. I backed away, heart racing, but I couldn't run. The room was gone. The world gone. Only me. And it. You belong to us now, it said. I closed my eyes and felt myself dissolve. Not die, dissolve. Thought by thought, memory by memory, until I was nothing but a shell, watching, waiting, like Matt, like the others. The last thing I remember was the void, and then silence. The screen stays black. The rain continues to fall. And somewhere, the hum never stops. I never expected the silence to be so loud. The house had always been old, its bones creaking under the weight of time. But that night, it was more than just the usual groans of wood and wind. It was something else, something that watched, that waited. It started a few days after we moved in. My daughter kept waking up in the middle of the night, staring at the corner of her room. No screams, no tears, just wide eyes locked onto the dark. I'd find her standing there, frozen, murmuring under her breath. When I asked her what she saw, she'd just whisper, "The man with no skin." I brushed it off as nightmares, stress from the move, a child's imagination adjusting to a new place. But then things shifted. It wasn't just her room anymore. Lights flickered without reason. Objects weren't where we'd left them. The air, cold and heavy, clung to every wall. Even the cat refused to enter certain rooms. My wife began to change too. She grew quiet, distracted. Often I'd find her staring at nothing, her lips moving, soundlessly. At first I thought she was praying, until I heard the words. They weren't prayers, they were names I didn't recognize, names she couldn't recall afterward. And then the dreams started, every night the same vision. A hallway, impossibly long and narrow, with doors on either side. I'd walk, and each door would creak open just slightly as I passed. Inside each, a glimpse of something. People I've never seen, rooms that didn't exist, events I hadn't lived through. But it all felt familiar, too familiar. In one, I saw myself, sitting in a chair, mouth sewn shut, eyes wide open. In another, I was holding a child I didn't recognize, sobbing as something dragged it from my arms into the dark. When I woke, I could still feel the weight of that child in my hands. I stopped sleeping. I stopped talking about it too. But the house didn't. It grew louder. One morning I found the walls of the basement covered in writing, scratched deep into the plaster, letters that weren't in any language I knew, but that I somehow understood. They spoke of debt, of bargains, of promises made in whispers, in blood. And every time I turned away from the wall, the letters rearranged themselves, always ending in the same sentence. You opened the door. I didn't remember opening anything, but the more I tried to ignore it, the more I felt watched. Not just by something in the house, by the house itself. It breathed. It pulsed. At night I could hear it, not the structure creaking, but a rhythmic wet sound, like something alive, sleeping just beneath the floorboards. I tried to record it, set up cameras, audio equipment, but nothing ever played back right. Videos would glitch, audio would erase itself, batteries drained in minutes. And yet, every morning, I'd wake to find new markings in the basement, some etched, some painted, some carved into the wood of the stairs. Once, I found a symbol burned into our front door, a circle of eyes, all open, all watching. My daughter stopped speaking altogether. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't move. She just sat by the window, staring out at nothing, lips slightly parted, and then she was gone. No sign of struggle. No broken windows, just her empty bed and the scent of smoke in the air. We called the police. They searched for days, weeks. Nothing. Eventually, they stopped asking questions. But the house didn't. It kept whispering, And one night, I listened. It told me where to go, what to bring, what to offer. I obeyed because deep down I already knew. It was never about the house. It was about what lived beneath it. I stood at the edge of the crawl space beneath the house, the hatch open like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. It smelled of damp earth and rusted iron. The air was thick, unmoving, as though whatever lay beneath had consumed even the wind. Climbed down with only a flashlight and a small silver object clutched in my fist, the one the house told me to bring. My knees hit the dirt floor. The ground wasn't firm. It shifted under my weight, like something breathing just beneath the surface. I moved forward. The narrow space seemed endless, the darkness around me absolute except for the weak beam of the flashlight. The silence was deafening. No echo, no insects. Just me, and the thing waiting. I found it curled against the wall, a figure frail and motionless as if stitched from ash and shadow. Its face was not a face, just smooth skin pulled taut over bone, no mouth, no eyes. Yet I felt it watching. I didn't speak. I just held out the object, a small tooth. Not mine, not my daughter's, but I knew whose it was. The creature reached out, a hand of fingers too long, knuckles bent backward, and took it from my palm. The moment it touched the tooth, the ground trembled, and then it whispered, not in my ears but inside my chest. You gave her. You cannot take her back. I dropped the flashlight. Darkness swallowed everything. I felt my body lifted, or maybe pulled, to down. A sensation like falling in every direction at once, and then nothing. No time, no space. Just thought. Just presence. I awoke on the kitchen floor, covered in dirt, the front door wide open. The sky outside was black, though the clock said noon. My wife was gone. No note, no sign of struggle, just the lingering scent of her perfume and smoke. I wandered the house like a ghost, touching walls that felt colder than ice, staring into mirrors that didn't reflect me. I wasn't hungry, wasn't tired. I was. Hollow days passed, maybe weeks, and the house began to change. Not visibly, no shifting walls or bleeding ceilings, but in the feeling. It no longer felt like it wanted something. It felt like it had something, and I was no longer the master. Was the echo. Rooms began leading to other rooms that shouldn't exist. I'd open a closet and find a staircase spiraling downward. I followed once. The stairs went on for what felt like hours. No walls, no air, just a shaft of stone and my own heartbeat, pounding louder with each step. At the bottom was a room, stone, circular, covered in eyes. Real ones. Blinded, ancient, embedded in the stone like fossils. They pulsed with faint light. And in the center, a mirror. Not glass, but water. Perfectly still. Leaned over it and saw not my face, but my daughter smiling. But her eyes were wrong, too wide, too dark, and behind her, the skinless man. I ran, tripped, fell upward. When I reached the top of the stairs again, I was back in the attic. Time had folded in on itself. The rules didn't apply anymore. The house wasn't a place, it was a memory, a prison, a mouth that had already swallowed me whole. There was a shift in the air that night, not just in the walls or in the rooms that no longer seemed to follow the same geometry, but in the very way time moved. It didn't pass like it used to. Seconds stretched. Minutes collapsed into themselves. I could hear the floor creak, not from weight or age, but like it was breathing, slow, labored breaths beneath the wooden bones of the house. I stopped trusting the clocks. I stopped checking my phone. Even my reflection had started to drift, lagging behind my movements like it wasn't sure it belonged to me anymore. Sometimes I'd find myself standing in front of mirrors for hours, unsure if I'd blinked, unsure if the thing looking back was still me or some version that had gotten lost in one of the lower rooms I never dared to enter. My eyes were sunken, darker than before. My skin, pale and dry, felt foreign to the touch, but what unnerved me most wasn't my appearance. It was the subtle changes in behavior. I'd think about leaving the room, and my body would move before I gave the order. My hand would reach for the door before I decided to stand. It was like I was being preempted, puppeted by something that had studied me too long and learned how to imitate will. The hallway lights would flicker exactly when my foot hovered near the switch. The kettle would hiss just as I started to feel thirsty. And when I'd whisper to myself in the middle of the night, just to break the silence, I'd swear I could hear a faint echo, just half a second too late, repeating what I said in a slightly different tone. The house was no longer a structure I lived in. It was responding, adapting, anticipating, it was aware, and then came the knocking. It didn't happen at the door or at any window. It came from beneath the floorboards, a soft rhythmic tapping like knuckles on hollow wood, always in threes, always at 3:33 a.m. I counted, I recorded, but nothing ever showed up in the playback, just silence, until I listened backward, and then the knock was there, clear, crisp, followed by my own voice, except I never remembered speaking, muttering a name I didn't recognize, a name that didn't sound human. I stopped sleeping. One night, desperate to feel something normal again, I went for a walk. I didn't lock the door behind me. I just needed to escape the breathing walls, the mirrors that refused to obey, the kitchen faucet that sometimes poured thick black water for half a second before switching back to normal. The neighborhood was empty, as if time had paused for everyone else too. No cars, no people. Just the hum of distant streetlights and the faint vibration in the soles of my feet, like the ground was echoing something too deep to hear. When I returned to the house, the front door was ajar. I hadn't left it that way. Inside, the lights were off and the air felt heavier than before, thicker, like stepping into molasses. The smell was different too, coppery, wet. I called out, not expecting an answer, and of course I didn't get one. But the knocking had stopped, and in its place, a low humming filled the space, like a song played just below hearing range. It wasn't random, it had structure, melody, like something ancient being remembered rather than sung. As I walked through the hallway, I noticed something new, carvings along the baseboards, symbols I didn't recognize, but which filled me with a deep, aching familiarity. Like déjà vu, but stronger. Some were jagged and violent, others smooth and circular, as though they carried instructions rather than meaning. They glowed faintly, just enough for my eyes to follow them as they led me deeper into the house, deeper than I thought the structure should allow. There was a door I didn't recognize at the end of the hall. It hadn't been there before. The paint was fresh. The doorknob was cold and pulsed like it had a heartbeat of its own. I opened it slowly, bracing myself, expecting something monstrous. But inside it was empty. A plain room. 4 walls. No. Windows. Just a chair in the center facing a mirror. I stepped inside. The door shut behind me and the humming stopped. I stood in that room longer than I can explain, unsure of whether I had been there minutes or hours. The chair in the center didn't feel like a place to sit. It felt like a trap. Something waiting for the moment I let my guard down. The mirror didn't reflect the room behind me. In fact, it didn't reflect anything at all. It was a void, dark and opaque, absorbing the dim light without returning a trace. And yet, the longer I stared into it, the more I felt something behind that glass. Movement, depth, like a window into something buried. I approached slowly, my heartbeat shallow, my breath tight in my chest. The silence of the room pressed against my ears like pressure underwater. I reached out and touched the surface, cold, slick, not like glass, not like anything man-made. It felt organic, like skin stretched over something hollow. Then it blinked. I stumbled backward. The mirror rippled, visibly, physically, as if some thick liquid sat just beyond the surface. My reflection appeared suddenly, but it wasn't quite me. The eyes were wrong. The mouth was too wide, curved in the beginning of a grin I didn't recognize. I watched it tilt its head slightly as if curious. I didn't move, but it did. The reflection's hands lifted, slow and deliberate, pressing against the other side of the glass. I stood frozen, breath locked in my throat, every instinct in me screaming to leave. But my feet wouldn't move. I was transfixed. The reflection began to mouth something. No sound came, just lips moving, slowly, rhythmically, like a chant I couldn't hear. And then, in an instant, the room shifted, not visibly, not in some dramatic cinematic way, but fundamentally. The air changed. The weight of the place pressed down harder, like gravity itself had deepened. My chest hurt. My knees buckled. A sharp ringing cut through my skull. And behind the mirror, just for a second, I saw it. Not a reflection. Figure, massive, indescribable. Its shape shimmered in and out of existence, built of geometry that defied physics and motion that obeyed no rules. It pulsed like it was alive but wrong, like it had stolen life from something else and didn't know how to wear it properly. Its many eyes locked on me, but they weren't fixed in one place. They moved, slid, repositioned across its form with every blink. Screamed without realizing it. The room snapped back. The mirror was just a mirror again. The chair remained untouched, but I wasn't the same. I stumbled out of the room, my vision blurry. The hallway behind the door stretched longer than it had been. The house had grown. I felt it. I was no longer in control, no longer the visitor or even the owner. I was part of it now. A cell in its system, a voice among its choir. I wandered through the corridors, now twisted and unrecognizable. Doors opened into spaces I didn't know existed. Windows showed landscapes that didn't match the world outside. One room contained nothing but hundreds of clocks, each ticking out of sync, their hands spinning backward, forward, stuttering, mid-movement. In another room, a stairway descended into an impossible spiral, deeper than the house could structurally allow. I didn't go down, not yet. Eventually, I found myself in the bedroom. Or a version of it. On the bed was my daughter's stuffed toy, the one that had vanished with her. Clean, undamaged, as though it had never been touched. My hand trembled as I reached for it. The moment I did, I heard her voice. Not in my head, in the room. Clear. Soft. "Daddy?" I turned. She was standing in the doorway, but it wasn't her, not exactly. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. Her eyes were too dark. She smiled, but it didn't reach her face. It was the smile of something that had studied how to mimic a child and hadn't quite gotten it right. I stepped back. She tilted her head. "I'm home now." The lights flickered, and when they returned, she was gone. The toy dropped to the floor with a soft thud, and the room was empty again. Since that appearance, the house began behaving like a living organism undergoing mutation. It no longer just contained memories, it fed on them. It seemed to metabolize dreams, regrets, and even silent confessions I had never voiced aloud. Every part of the structure started rewriting itself without my permission. The bathroom door now led to a narrow corridor that spiraled downward, ending in an attic where water dripped from the ceiling, though the roof was dry. The stairs creaked in different tones, like they were trying to form words. Windows no longer showed the outside world as I knew it, but twisted versions, alternate timelines of my life branching quietly behind the glass. Once, I saw my wife smiling, cradling a second child in her arms. I wasn't there, and what I felt wasn't jealousy or grief, but the chilling certainty that somewhere, somehow, that was real. Days passed, or what I believed were days. Sunlight no longer entered the way it used to. Everything looked stuck in twilight even at noon. The mirrors started to behave with intention. They refused to reflect certain angles, and in others, they revealed things that weren't physically present. One mirror displayed the kitchen, but showed a second shadow moving just behind mine even though I was alone. I tried to rationalize it, a defect, a trick of light, but I no longer believed the easy answers. The house was trying to teach me, not with words but with visions, with subtle changes. This wasn't just haunting, it was initiation, descent, a forced education about the boundaries of what we call real. One night, I woke up to a sound I had never heard before. It wasn't knocking, not whispering, not the usual creaks of aging wood. It was dragging. Something massive being pulled across the floor below. I rose without thinking, bare feet against cold planks, heart dull and heavy in my chest. As I crept toward the source, The static in the air made my skin prickle. Each step felt like I was walking through thick, invisible threads. The sound stopped when I reached the living room, but the floor bore the evidence. Long, claw-like grooves etched deeply into the wood. They led directly to the basement door. It was ajar. Descending those stairs was like slipping into a pocket of dead time. The air was different, wet, metallic, tasting faintly of rust and static. With each step, reality distorted. The walls seemed to breathe. Space stretched unnaturally, as though gravity itself had been rewritten. At the bottom, the darkness wasn't absence. It was presence, heavy, alive, pulsing with awareness. I stood motionless, eyes adjusting to the impossible black, until I saw it. Something hunched in the far corner. It didn't move. Not at first. It was waiting. I couldn't turn away. My body was no longer mine. It lifted its head slowly. The face was human, partially, but wrong. Pieced together from fragments of many. One eye young, the other ancient, lips cracked and mismatched. And when its mouth opened, it didn't speak. It sang, a song with no language, no melody, just vibration. Deep, resonant. It hit something. Inside me, I fell to my knees, not out of fear, out of recognition. This wasn't a monster. It was something else entirely. It was memory. It was the voice of guilt, of remorse, of emotional rot that had never found a voice. It wore my regrets like skin. I surfaced from that basement as if from a drowning. Gasping, trembling, my lungs full of air, but my mind full of shapes I couldn't name. The world had remained still above. Minutes had passed, but inside me it felt like decades had slipped by. I couldn't look at myself the same. My reflection avoided my eyes. The house knew now. The doors opened before I touched them. The lights flickered to my thoughts. The shadows delayed just behind my movement, mimicking me too late like an echo. I was no longer a guest. I was part of it. A neuron in its mind. A ghost with a heartbeat. I couldn't remember what life had been before this began. What was real? What was projection? My memories started bleeding together. Childhood scenes now returned in dreams, wrapped in unfamiliar symbols. In one of them, I was back in my old bedroom. A mirror hung on the wall. And within it, I saw my daughter, crying, trapped on the other side, her tiny fists pounding the surface, screaming for me. I woke with blood under my nails, as if I'd been clawing glass. I began to lose track of time altogether. The days didn't come in the same order. Sometimes I would wake to what felt like morning, only to find the sky outside pitch black, yet birds chirped as if it were noon. Other times, I'd drift off during what I swore was night and awaken bathed in an unnatural, golden light that had no visible source. The clocks inside the house spun of their own accord. One would race forward, another would tick backward. I stopped checking them altogether. They served no purpose anymore. The house had entered me as much as I had entered it. I could feel its moods, its hunger. Some rooms grew colder when I entered them. Others seemed to sigh or expand gently as if welcoming me. But the whispers never stopped. Not real ones. They weren't auditory exactly. They were impressions. Thoughts not my own that hovered just behind mine. At times I could swear they came from the walls, other times from the floor. Once I pressed my ear to the kitchen tiles and felt something breathing beneath. I was no longer dreaming. The dreams were dreaming me. One night I attempted to leave, not because I wanted to, but because something inside me whispered that it was necessary. I opened the front door and found nothing. Not darkness, not a street, nothing. A void, vast and unmoving, stretched endlessly before me. It wasn't black. It was the absence of black, an absence of everything. When I reached out, my fingers vanished before my eyes. I recoiled, closed the door, sat in silence. There was no exit. Only inward. The memories that weren't mine began to surface more frequently. In the living room, I saw a child sitting cross-legged on the floor, building towers out of small stones. She didn't look at me. Her face was familiar, but wrong, like a sketch of someone you used to know. I blinked and she was gone. In the mirror near the stairs, I once saw an old man with a deep scar under his eye. He looked tired, hollowed out. We stared at each other for what felt like minutes before I realized I wasn't looking into a mirror. I was looking through a window, and he was inside, or perhaps I was. I found journals, or rather they appeared, placed carefully on the nightstand or beneath my pillow. Each one was written in a different hand, but every entry began with the same phrase. I thought I could leave. Page after page chronicled spirals into despair, into obsession, into surrender. Some ended mid-sentence. Others were smeared with blood. One was still warm. I didn't write them, but I remembered writing them. That's when the dreams began to repeat. I'd walk the same hallway again and again, but each time a new door appeared. Behind one, I saw myself asleep, being watched by a shadow with no eyes. Behind another, my wife stood in a field of static, motionless, her mouth open as if mid-scream, but there was no sound, only silence, thick, deafening. And then came the knocking, always at the same hour, always from inside the walls, not the door. The walls. I knocked back, and something answered. The sound that answered my knock wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was like a whisper made of bones, a language from beneath the foundation, spoken through creaks and vibrations in the wood. I pressed my palm against the wall where the sound had come from, and the wall pulsed gently like a heartbeat. I whispered back, though I didn't know why. My words weren't important. The act of speaking was enough. Something was listening, something old. After that night, I started waking up in different rooms than the ones I'd fallen asleep in. I'd lie down in the bedroom, then wake on the floor of the attic. Once I found myself standing in the bathtub, fully clothed, staring at a faucet that was dripping black water onto my shoes. The house was moving me, rearranging me, and I let it, because each time it did, it showed me more. I started seeing the others, not ghosts, not in the traditional sense. They were impressions, echoes of previous occupants. A woman in a green dress who paced the hallway while holding her arms like she was cradling an infant. A boy no older than 10 who would sit on the stairs, whispering numbers into his cupped hands. None of them ever looked at me, but they knew I was there, and I began to understand they weren't trapped. They were transformed, changed into parts of the structure like veins in its circulatory system. Every cry, every secret, every betrayal committed under this roof, absorbed, recycled, played back. And then the house gave me something of my own. A door I hadn't noticed before appeared beside the basement steps. Small, child-sized, I had to get on my knees to open it. Inside was a crawl space lit by a single hanging bulb, and at the far end, a doll, one I remembered from my daughter's room. Its head had been stitched back together, the same tear in the fabric arm, mended clumsily, with red thread. I hadn't seen it in years. I picked it up, and the moment I did, I felt her presence, not in the room, in me. Like a key turning in a lock. She wasn't dead, but she wasn't living either. She was part of this, she always had been. I staggered back from the crawl space, the doll clutched tightly in my fist. The door behind me closed softly, not slammed. Not forced, like a parent tucking in a child. The warmth of it made my stomach twist. I realized then that I had never owned this house. No one ever did. The title, the deed, the keys, they were formalities. The house chose you. And once chosen, you were rewritten. The final change began the following evening. I was brushing my teeth, staring into the bathroom mirror, when my reflection blinked out of sync, just once, barely noticeable, but I saw it, and then it smiled. Before I did, a fraction of a second early, the wrong kind of delay, I dropped the toothbrush, backed away. My reflection stood still, smiling, watching, waiting. I turned off the light, and it was still there. That night, I didn't sleep. because I wasn't sure who I'd be when I woke up. I stopped checking the date. Calendars had become lies. The clock on the kitchen wall no longer moved. It pulsed, slowly, like a dying heartbeat. I didn't know how long I had been in the house. I didn't even know if I was still aging. My fingernails hadn't grown. My beard remained exactly as it was the first week I moved in. I had entered a loop, a slow decay that didn't rot but preserved, like being embalmed while still breathing. The whispers grew louder, not with volume, but with presence. They didn't speak in language anymore. They shaped meaning directly into my spine, into my teeth. I would sit in the hallway and feel entire memories inserted into me that I'd never lived. One moment I was sitting quietly. The next I remembered burying something in the garden, something wrapped in canvas, wet with something thick and red. I remembered the weight of it, the effort of the shovel, the shallow depth, but I had never buried anything. Had I? Then came the visitors. They knocked. Just once, always once. A soft knock at midnight, but there was never anyone at the door until there was. It was a man, or something like one. Tall, gaunt, wearing a coat that was wrong for the season. Thick wool, damp with a rain that hadn't fallen. His skin was dry, cracking around the mouth like old paper. He didn't speak, just handed me a letter sealed with black wax. The seal bore no symbol, no initial, just a spiral pressed into its surface. Inside, a single sentence. "You're ready now." That night, the basement door creaked open by itself. Not ajar, open, wide and waiting. The staircase descended further than before. Much further. Steps that shouldn't have fit beneath the house stretched endlessly downward. I took a candle. I descended. I don't remember how long I walked. Minutes, hours, days. The further I went, the more the stairs twisted. Not just in direction, but in material. Wood became stone. Stone became bone. The air thickened, smelled of sulfur and old flowers. I heard sobbing, not mine. A chorus of it, soft, rhythmic, like waves. And then I reached the bottom. There was no room, no chamber, just a lake. Black, still, silent. A wooden boat waited at the edge. No oars, no ropes, just a lantern that flickered without flame. I stepped in. The boat moved, not through water, but through thought. I saw things on the shore, versions of me. One weeping, one laughing with eyes gouged out, one holding my daughters. Hand both covered in ash. The boat stopped in the middle of the lake, and that's when I saw the house underwater, perfectly intact, windows lit, curtains shifting. It was upside down, anchored to nothing, and something inside it moved, watching me. I didn't want to go back, I didn't want to continue, but I knew then. This was never about escape. It was about return, about remembrance. The lake was memory. The house was the mind, and I was only now beginning to descend. I didn't speak as the boat drifted back. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. The return was not an ascent. It was an unraveling. The stairs that had led me down were no longer there. I emerged, not in the basement, but in the attic. The window was gone. The walls pulsed gently, like lungs. The house had shifted again, not around me, inside me. I was the house now. I walked through the rooms with a silence I hadn't earned. Every step echoed with memories I hadn't lived, but now claimed. I knew where every board creaked, where the blood had once pooled beneath the floor. I didn't need light. I could feel the layout in my bones. The house didn't hide from me anymore. It had accepted me, or maybe it had replaced me. My reflection no longer moved. I stopped checking mirrors. They weren't mine. They belonged to the others now, the ones who watched, the ones who waited. Sometimes I'd hear breathing behind me, feel eyes on the back of my neck, but when I turned, there was only the hallway. Stretched longer than before. It always stretched. There was no more outside, not really. The windows showed landscapes I didn't recognize. Forests made of glass, skies the color of dried blood, fields full of swaying, eyeless statues. Sometimes they moved, sometimes they wept, but none of it mattered. The house was all there was. I understood finally what the message meant. You're ready now. It wasn't an invitation. It was a diagnosis. The house had broken me down, layer by layer, until nothing remained of the man who walked in. Just echoes, just walls, just creaking floorboards and shifting doors. I didn't leave the house, I was left by the house. It needed new material, a new vessel, a new host. I found a letter near the fireplace. It was blank until I touched it, and then the words appeared. Welcome home. That night I sat in the armchair in the living room. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I listened. The knocking returned. Soft, from the walls. And this time, I opened them. I never thought I would see that place again. Not after what it did to me. Not after what it took. But some places don't need an invitation to return. They live under your skin, in the spaces between your thoughts, waiting for you to forget them, so they can remind you. It was late September when I got the call. An unfamiliar voice, formal and cold, informing me that an old property, one I hadn't thought about in decades, had defaulted in some kind of obscure legal transfer. You're listed as next of kin, he said, like it meant something. Like that phrase wasn't soaked in the kind of blood you can't wash off. The address made my stomach churn. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years, but there it was, a simple combination of words that opened a door I had locked long ago. And against my better judgment, I agreed to go back. The drive was quiet, too quiet. The further I got from the city, the more everything seemed to flatten, as if the world were losing depth. Even the trees lining the highway looked faded, like they had given up on pretending to be alive. My phone lost signal somewhere past the last gas station. That felt deliberate. Like the land itself was cutting the cord. When I finally arrived, I sat in the car for nearly an hour staring at the house. It hadn't changed. The same sagging roof, the same broken shutters, the same porch that leaned a little too far to the left. Time hadn't touched it, not really. It had aged, sure, but not like other houses. It had settled into itself like a predator in tall grass, waiting. I stepped out of the car. The air smelled like damp earth and something older, something like rot but colder. Not the rot of flesh but of memory, a sourness that stuck to the back of your throat. The door opened before I touched it. I froze. There was no wind, no draft, no explanation. Just the soft creak of old hinges and the gaping mouth of the house, ready to swallow me whole. I stepped inside. The floorboards moaned under my weight. Dust hung in the air like fog, but the silence was heavier. It pressed against my skin, settled, in my bones. Every corner of the house looked the same, too familiar, like a dream I hadn't remembered until now. The wallpaper was peeling in long, curling strips. The mirrors were all turned to face the wall, and in the center of the living room was the chair, that chair. I don't know why I walked to it, I don't know why I sat, but as soon as I did, I remembered the screams, the laughter, the way the house had once whispered through the vents at night, saying my name like it was tasting it. My eyes closed and the house sighed. I don't know how long I sat there, hours maybe, long enough for the light to shift, for the shadows to stretch like fingers across the floor. When I finally stood, my legs trembled. Something had changed, not in the house, in me. I walked through the hallway, my fingers brushing the walls as if to remind myself that I was still real. Each step echoed with a familiarity that didn't belong to me. Memories that weren't mine pressed against the edges of my mind. Fragments of arguments, sobs, hands gripping wrists too tightly. In the kitchen, I found the knife. Just like before, placed neatly on the counter, its blade clean but cold. Too cold. Like it hadn't just been waiting there, like it had been used. Recently. I should have left then. I should have run. But the door was gone, not locked. Gone. Behind me, the hallway had changed. Longer now, narrower. The wallpaper was different. Darker, wet-looking, like it had been soaked in something red and left to rot. And at the end of it was a figure, small, still watching. It didn't move, but I did, because some part of me remembered, not in words, in fear, raw and primal. I walked toward the figure, even as my body screamed not to. even as the air thickened and my vision blurred. Each step took a piece of me, scraped it away like skin on concrete. When I reached the end, there was no figure, just a mirror, but not like the others. This one faced outward, and in it, I wasn't alone. I stared at the mirror and it stared back, not with reflection but with memory. The room around me shifted slightly, as if the walls were breathing. And inside that glass, I saw something impossible. Myself, but older, worn, hollow-eyed, wearing clothes I didn't recognize. He moved when I didn't, smiled when I didn't feel anything at all. And then he leaned closer, his lips almost touching the glass, and whispered a name I had buried decades ago. Not mine, but hers. The girl. I hadn't thought of her in years, had done everything to forget. But now the house was reminding me, dragging her up from the depths like a drowned body breaching the surface, mouth still open in a silent scream. The moment I heard her name, the floor cracked beneath me. Not broke, cracked, like something old was waking up. I backed away. The mirror went dark. The hallway behind me was different again. The pictures on the wall were no longer faceless or faded. They were vivid, detailed, and I recognized every person in them. My family, my friends, even people who had died before I was born, all staring directly at me. No smiles, just that same cold, accusing look, as if they were waiting for something, as if I was already guilty. Downstairs the sound began, faint at first, a rhythmic tapping, wood on wood like a cane or a finger, tapping in sequence. 1, 2, pause, 1, 2, over and over again. I followed it, though every part of me wanted to run in the other direction. The sound led me to the cellar door, a place I had never dared to enter as a child. It had always been locked, always. But now it stood open, revealing a stairway that descended into darkness so complete it felt like a wound in the house. I descended. The air got colder with each step. Not the kind of cold that bites, but the kind that sinks into you, that makes your teeth ache and your lungs tighten. The stairs groaned beneath me. I counted them, 47. The number echoed in my head. 47 steps, and at the bottom the air changed. It wasn't just cold, it was wet. The cellar was flooded, not with water, but with sound. Memories played like echoes in a tunnel, arguments, screams, laughter that ended too abruptly. Walls were damp, and every surface was covered in a black mold that pulsed softly as if alive. In the center of the room was a chair, not like the one upstairs. This one was covered in straps, and in it sat a mannequin, its head tilted, its mouth sewn shut with wire, but it breathed. I swear to you, it breathed. I moved closer. The tapping had stopped. Now there was only the faintest hum, like an old machine trying to wake up. I could feel it behind my eyes, a vibration that made my vision blur. I reached out to touch the mannequin, and the moment my fingers brushed its shoulder, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed everything. I was blind, and then I was somewhere else. Not the cellar, not the house, but a hallway of mirrors stretching into infinity. Each reflection showed a different version of me, some broken, some monstrous, some sobbing, some laughing with blood on their hands, and all of them were whispering, not in unison, in overlap. Hundreds of voices clawing their way into my mind, each telling a different story, each one mine. I fell to my knees, I screamed, and then silence. I opened my eyes. Back in the chair. Upstairs. Daylight filtered through the window. The knife was on the floor beside me. Bloody. Still wet. My hands were clean, but the knife wasn't. I didn't remember using it, but I knew I had. I just didn't know on what or who. That's when I noticed the trail. Drops of red, leading from the kitchen to the basement door. I followed it. Down the stairs. 47 steps. And when I reached the bottom, there was no mannequin, no straps, just the same chair, empty. And the walls, they weren't mold-covered anymore. They were mirrors, every single one. I didn't want to see my own face anymore. Not like that. Not multiplied, fractured, watching me from 1,000 angles. Some weeping, some smirking, some mouthing things I couldn't hear, but felt like confessions I had forgotten how to speak. The mirrors were endless. Where the cellar walls had once been, now they stood like sentinels, reflective but not always accurate. Some showed versions of myself I didn't recognize. Others showed rooms I'd never entered, moments I had never lived. But still I knew them. Knew them in the way you know your own heartbeat even when you're trying not to listen. A sharp noise broke the trance, glass cracking, but not underfoot, overhead. I looked up, and there it was, a massive pane of mirrored ceiling splintering. From the center, a hairline fracture expanding like a vein of lightning across the surface, and then a drop of blood fell onto my forehead. Not mine. Cold. Fresh. I wiped it away and looked around. The mirrors began to hum, not with sound but vibration, like static in the bones, and in their surface shadows began to gather. One by one, reflections turned. Not me, not my movements. They began to walk toward the glass. Closer, closer. I backed, away. The room had no door, it didn't need one, because the mirrors opened. The first thing through was a hand, not attached to anything I could see. Pale, long-fingered, nails stained red. It gripped the edge of the frame and pulled, distorting the glass like liquid. From it stepped a figure in a dress, soaked with something dark, head bowed, hair wet and tangled. The moment she raised her face, I remembered everything. She had been real, she had been here, and I had done nothing to save her. I had watched, frozen, and the house had fed on it. She moved toward me without speaking. The mirrors behind her rippled like water. Her eyes held mine, not accusing, not angry, just empty, hollow like a grave left open too long. She stopped inches from me, reached up slowly, and placed her cold hand on my chest. I stopped breathing. Not by choice. The air vanished. Like her touch drained it from the room, I collapsed. When I woke up, I was outside, back on the porch. Daylight, my car still there, the door still open, but the house was new, not renovated, not restored. New white paint, clean shutters, flowers on the windowsills. Children's laughter echoed faintly from somewhere around the back. It wasn't real, it couldn't be. I stepped inside, and this time the air was warm, smelled like cinnamon and pine. A fire crackled gently in the hearth. There were voices, soft, casual, a woman humming in the kitchen, footsteps upstairs. I followed the sound. The woman had her back to me, hair pinned neatly, a familiar dress. She turned around slowly, and it was her, the girl, alive, smiling. "You're early," she said, setting a kettle on the stove. "Dinner's almost ready." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. She touched my face gently. "You're safe now, we're all safe." And for a moment, I believed her. I sat at the table. The food was warm, tasted like memories. Laughter echoed from upstairs. A boy and a girl playing. Their names fell from my mouth like instinct, names I didn't know I remembered. Everything felt right, too right. That's when the humming changed, slightly, a wrong note, barely noticeable. I looked at her, still smiling, too wide. The room shimmered, only for a second, but long enough for the truth to bleed through. This wasn't safety, it was sedation. A dream, constructed, maintained, by the house, because I had tried to leave, and now. It was showing me what I wanted, to keep me here, to feed. The walls began to peel again, slowly, revealing what lay beneath. The same rotting wood, the same black mold, the same bloody handprints where wallpaper should have been. I stood. The children's. Laughter cut off. The fire hissed and died. She tilted her head. "Where are you going?" "I'm not staying," I said. She frowned, just slightly. "You already did." I ran. The door slammed before I reached it. The lights burst, darkness again, and in it, footsteps, not mine, surrounding, approaching. And the last thing I heard was her voice, soft and close. "You never left. You just forgot." The darkness didn't just surround me, it seeped in. Under the skin, behind the eyes, inside the teeth. There was no floor, no ceiling, no walls anymore, only space and breathing. Something was breathing with me, or worse. For me, every inhale I tried to take was answered by something else exhaling. Syncopated, intentional, mocking. I reached forward in the dark, and my hands brushed fabric. Not clothes, drapes, thick velvet like in an old theater. I pulled them apart. Behind them, a single spotlight illuminated a stage, and on that stage sat a chair. Empty, but not abandoned. The seat was warm when I touched it, like someone had just left. I heard whispers, distant at first, then swelling into layered voices, indistinct but accusatory, not speaking to me, about me. Why didn't he stop it? He watched. He knew. My heart pounded. This wasn't a hallucination. It was a trial. And I was the only one in the courtroom. The whispers stopped. Footsteps replaced them. Slow, deliberate, heavy. From stage left, a figure appeared. Not walking, gliding, dressed in robes made of photographs. Each photo blurry, grayscale, and wet like they'd just come out of a darkroom bath. Some faces were recognizable. Mine, hers, others, but all distorted. He held a gavel, not a judge, a collector. He gestured to the chair. I sat, and the trial began. No one spoke. Not aloud, but the mirrors returned, surrounding the stage in a perfect arc. Each one lit up with scenes from my life. Decisions, moments, choices I forgot I made, lies I told, pain I ignored, screams I dismissed. In one, I saw myself turning off a phone call that could have saved a life. In another, laughing while someone wept behind me. And in the last, the one that made the others tremble, I saw the girl. The basement. My back. Turned. I didn't hurt her. I didn't save her either. The sentence was clear. Not death, not pain, but remembering, truly, fully, endlessly. The collector raised the gavel. The mirrors exploded. Glass rained down, but never touched me. Instead, I was the glass shattered across a million timelines, each one a loop of guilt and silence. And when I blinked again, I was back. In the house. Living room. TV on, static. And sitting on the couch, her again. Older. Eyes hollow. She turned to me, slow and deliberate, and spoke for the first time in a voice I could barely recognize. "Do you think it's over?" I couldn't answer. She stood. The living room faded, replaced by a hospital corridor. Long, white, endless. Nurses passed by, faces blurry, all moving in reverse. Time was folding. I saw myself in one of the rooms, sitting at a bedside, her body pale. Machines breathing for her. I watched myself cry, but only a little. Then I left, walked out, moved on. She never did. The hallway warped again. The house returned, but not the same. Now every wall was covered in writing, not paint, scratched. With nails. "Keys, something sharp, repeating phrases," I begged. "You left, it still hurts." Over and over and over again. The lights flickered. I stumbled backward and bumped into a door, one I'd never seen. It opened, and inside was a child's room. Neat, clean, toys untouched, and on the bed, her journal. I picked it up. Read it, every word was a wound. She had waited for someone, anyone, but no one came. Because I had already convinced myself it wasn't my problem, I left the journal on the floor and stepped into the hallway. A new door stood at the end, marked only with one word: yours. Opened it. Inside, mirrors again, but this time, no movement, no other selves, just one. Me staring back, tired, afraid, but still here. And that's when I understood. The house never haunted me. It was me. Every room, every voice, every scream, every silence, all fragments I tried to wall off, hide, disown. This wasn't about ghosts, it was about consequences. The house didn't trap me. I built it, brick by brick, memory by memory. And now, all the doors were open. The final one was mine to choose. The final door creaked open, not with sound, but with memory. Its hinges were silent, but the air itself shifted, thickened, heavier, like walking into an unspoken truth. Inside was a hallway that didn't make sense. It curved, gently, impossibly, like the inside of a spiral shell. There were no lights, no shadows either, just a pale luminescence radiating from the walls, which were made of nothing I recognized. Not wood, not stone, not mirror. Thought. That was the only word that fit. I was walking through my own cognition, twisted, infinite, recursive. Along the walls, shapes formed. They weren't static, they pulsed, memories once again. But these were different, intimate, private. Things I had never shared with anyone, not even myself. I passed by the time I almost drowned at 5 years old, when I saw something under the water and told everyone it was just a branch. It wasn't. I saw the moment in 7th grade when I laughed while someone got hurt, just to fit. Then I felt the silence afterward, when I knew I'd become someone else, a stranger. Then I saw her again, but not as she died, as she lived. I saw her reading alone in that damp basement, scribbling in her journal, singing softly to herself, songs she made up, songs no one ever heard, but her and me, because I was there. Just outside, the door. I had heard her and done nothing. The hallway pulsed like a heartbeat. Boom, boom, boom. Each step was a confrontation, a peeling back. I wasn't just walking, I was being unlayered. By the time I reached the end, I wasn't sure who was still moving, me or the memory of me. The spiral ended at a room, no door, just an entryway. Inside, a single object sat beneath a pale spotlight. A box, small, plain, wooden but vibrating with pressure, as if it contained something too large for its frame. I stepped forward. The air resisted, thick as syrup, but I kept walking. I reached the box and placed both hands on its lid. It was warm, alive. I opened it, and inside was silence, not emptiness. Silence. Heavy, laden, and then rising from the void, a whisper, not in words but in understanding. This is what you've buried. Images flooded in, raw, unfiltered. Every lie, every cowardice, every moment I could have spoken up and didn't, every apology I rehearsed but never said. It was all here, condensed into sensation, not memory, not story, but feeling. I sank to my knees. The weight of it broke me. No punishment could have matched it. No torment more accurate. This wasn't horror. It was honesty. And when I finally looked up again, the room was gone. I was outside, standing in front of the house. Only now it wasn't there. Just foundation, rubble, ash, smoke trailing up into a grey sky. I was holding something in my hand. The box, still warm, still pulsing, but now closed again. Sealed. Looked around. No signs of her, no signs of me, only wind and the faint sound of singing. Far off, soft, unreachable. I turned, walked away, and for the first time, the ground didn't fight me, it let me leave. The forest parted without resistance. The fog thinned, my car still there, still open. I got in, sat, held the box, and breathed. But I knew the truth now. I could leave the place, but not what I carried. That house wasn't haunted. It was a haunting, a living memory, a karmic echo. And the worst part? It was waiting for the next one. It started with a phone call no one should ever receive. Not at that hour. Not with that voice. The line crackled and all I heard was breathing, ragged, hesitant, like someone was forcing the air through lungs that didn't want it. Then a single word, drenched in fear. Help. I recognized the voice, but it didn't sound like him. That was the beginning. That's when the cracks began to spread. When I arrived at Matt's place, the house was open, lights on, front door ajar. The TV played, static, the kind of white noise that doesn't just fill the air, it pressurizes it. Makes you feel like something is standing right behind you, breathing in sync. But Matt wasn't there, only his phone, lying face up on the couch, and a note beside it, scribbled in haste. Find the canyon, he said, the canyon, The old one. No. Trails, no maps, just silence. I should have called someone, but I didn't, because a part of me was already infected. I took his phone and drove. Hours passed. The landscape twisted into something I barely recognized. Roads narrowed, trees thickened, the sky darkened not because of clouds, but because of presence. When I finally reached the edge of the Grand Canyon, it wasn't majestic. It was wrong. Like something ancient and starving had curled itself into the earth and cracked the surface from within. I stood at the rim, the wind biting into me like a warning, and then I saw him far below. Too far, but unmistakable. Matt. He was standing on a ledge that shouldn't have existed, facing away from me, arms limp at his sides. No gear, no rope, no explanation, I shouted. No reaction. Just as I was about to call for help, the phone in my hand buzzed. Not mine. His. The screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize. The Watcher, I answered, static. Then, laughter. Low, dry, human, almost. Then a phrase. He showed us the path. Now it's your turn. Click. Silence. And when I looked down again, Matt was gone. No sound, no fall, just vanished. I scrambled down the path, if it could even be called that. Dust turned to ash beneath my feet. The air thinned, and the canyon. Walls seemed to close around me like a throat tightening. Hours passed, or minutes or days. Time folded in that place. Every echo bounced wrong, like it was imitating my voice, not repeating it. Then I found the cave. Small, circular, hidden behind a bend in the rock that didn't exist on any map. Inside, carvings, thousands. Every inch of the stone was etched with faces, not drawn, not sculpted, but pressed. As if someone had pushed heads into molten rock and left them there to cool. I recognized one, Matt, eyes wide, mouth open, screaming silently. Then I saw the others. Faces I didn't know. Men, women, children, all twisted in identical horror. And in the center of the cave, a stone table, upon it a book, bound in what looked like leather but felt warmer. The cover read, "Those Who Look Too Deep." I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. Inside, names, dates, coordinates, all matching disappearances, real ones I had read about, ones I remembered from childhood, some crossed out, others fresh. At the very bottom of the list, my name. The ink was still wet. I dropped the book, turned, ran. But the cave had changed. Now it was longer, deeper, the air thicker. The faces on the walls began to move, not quickly, but just enough to make me question if they ever were still. Then one of them blinked and whispered, "You opened the book, now you write the rest." I ran until my lungs bled, until the canyon spat me out beneath a sky that had forgotten the sun. My car was gone. The road was dust, and the only thing in my pocket was the book. Smaller now, thinner, just one name left inside. Mine, and below it, a blank line, waiting. The house didn't look real anymore. I don't mean in some dreamlike sense, though dreams would have been a mercy. I mean that its geometry felt wrong, its angles bent inwards. The windows didn't reflect. And the door seemed slightly too tall, as though it was made for someone else. Still, I entered, because the alternative was the silence outside. Inside, everything smelled like wet stone and rust. There were no lights, yet I could see. Shadows clung to the ceiling in spider-like shapes. The furniture was old, not aged, ancient. Matt's things were scattered, but not abandoned. It was as if he had just stepped into the next room. I called out. No reply. Only the creak of floorboards shifting. Underweight, that wasn't mine. And then, footsteps above me, slow measured. I took the stairs. Each step groaned like it remembered. Upstairs, the hallway extended longer than it should. The physics of the space distorted. I passed 7 doors. Each marked, not numbered, marked with symbols scratched deeply into the wood. The 4th one pulsed. Put my hand on it. Warm breathing. I pushed it open. The room was empty, except for a chair in the center, and on the chair, an object, a mask, but not a decorative one. This was worn. Flesh still clung to its edges. It was shaped like a face screaming. Through burlap and beside it another note, his handwriting shaky, uneven. Don't wear it, no matter what it says, no matter how much it sounds like me. I should have run, but I didn't, because something inside me wanted to understand. So I sat in the chair, and I waited. I don't know how long, but eventually, it spoke. Not aloud. Inside. My head. My name isn't Matt. It wasn't a voice. It was a presence. Cold, observant, dissecting. It showed me flashes, images, a cavern beneath the house deeper than the canyon, a ritual, old, forgotten by time, remembered by stone, people gathered in circles, eyes sewn shut, smiling, blood painted on the walls, not as violence, but as offering. Then I saw Matt, not my friend, the other Matt, the one he had become, standing in the center of the circle, arms raised, wearing the mask, his voice not his own, and from the stone, something rose. It had no shape, only intent. It saw through me, and it entered. I tore off the mask, gasped. Back in the room, sweating, but not alone. Someone stood in the corner, no face, just a blur. Tall, watching. It pointed toward the floor. Hatch covered in dust. I opened it. Stairs descended into pure black. I went down, because that's what the story wanted. The walls narrowed, began to breathe. The stone was wet. Not with water, with memory. Faces formed from the rock, whispering truths I didn't want to hear. You were never supposed to come. Some doors open both ways. Every time you remember him, he remembers you. At the bottom, another room, circular, an altar in the center. Above it, suspended, Matt, but not as I knew him. Eyes burned black, mouth stitched open, limbs hanging like a puppet, and across the walls, names dozens, maybe hundreds, mine among them. Not carved, etched in blood. The faceless figure stood beside the altar. It reached into Matt's chest and pulled something out. It wasn't an organ. It was light, but not warm. It flickered, like it didn't. Belong. The figure held it out to me. You followed the thread. You wore the mask. You are the next gate. And it placed the light in my chest. I screamed, but no sound came, only silence. The same silence from the phone call, from the canyon, from the cave inside me. And when I woke up, I was back in my car, middle of the road, sunset, overhead. Dust. On my shoes, Matt's phone in the passenger seat. No messages, no calls, just one photo in the gallery. Me, wearing the mask, smiling, and behind me, the canyon, twisted smaller, like it had fed. The days that followed were thin, not empty, hollow. Like something had drained the substance from reality, and all that remained was the outline. People talked to me. They moved their mouths, gestured, smiled, but I couldn't hear them. Not really. Their words slid off me like rain on glass, because deep down I knew I hadn't come back alone. At night, I dreamed of the canyon. Not as it was, but as it wanted to be remembered. Alive, shifting, bleeding into the sky like an open wound. I'd see Matt, sometimes screaming, sometimes smiling, sometimes both. But the worst dreams weren't of him, they were of me, standing at the edge, looking down, holding the book, and laughing. One morning I woke to find a message burned into my wall, not written, scorched. You are the path now. I moved, new city, new name, new job. But it followed, the watcher. I'd see him across the street, in reflections, in the gaps between thoughts, always facing me, always waiting. I started recording myself at night, audio. Mostly, the first week, nothing. Just tossing, turning, maybe some muttering. The second week, scratches. Long, slow scrapes, as if something was dragging itself along the walls. The third week, I heard my own voice, clear, awake, saying things I didn't remember. Phrases like, they're still inside. Don't close your eyes, they'll take the name if you don't use it. I stopped recording. But the whispers didn't stop. They just got louder, more demanding, and then they gave me a task, a place, coordinates, another canyon, smaller, hidden. I told myself I wouldn't go, that I wasn't a pawn in some eldritch echo of consciousness. But we both knew I would. The journey took days. This one wasn't on maps. Locals didn't speak of it. Some wouldn't even acknowledge its existence. When I finally reached it, there were no signs, no markings, just a gap in the world, like reality had tripped and torn its skin. I stepped in. Immediately the air shifted. It was heavier here, not denser, older. Every breath tasted like ancient promises. The descent was slow, like the place wanted me to savor it. Every ledge, every turn held memories that weren't mine, visions, flickers of other lives, people I'd never met, but had. One by one they looked at me, begging, blaming, burning. At the bottom, there was no cave, no temple, just a mirror, but not of me. It showed the version of me that had never returned, still in the canyon, still wearing the mask, leading others in, smiling. And behind that version, dozens more, each a different me, some older, some broken, some fused with things. That didn't belong in any biology book. Then the mirror cracked, and through the fractures something spoke. You were never chosen. You were never special. You were just open. The light shifted. Suddenly I wasn't alone. Figures emerged, shadows of myself. Some held books, others masks. One held Matt, or what was left of him, eyes wide, still screaming. No, sound. They circled me, whispering, repeating. You opened the path. You followed the voice. You wrote your name, and from the dark a hand emerged. Long fingers, too many joints. It pressed against my chest and pushed. I fell, not down, not physically. I fell through versions of myself, each more distorted than the last. One was blind. One was laughing endlessly. One was gone. Just empty skin, holding a name. When I landed, I was in my apartment, or a version of it. Everything looked the same, but the air felt intentional. The walls watched. The shadows pulsed, and the book sat on my desk. New cover, new title, Volume 2. And the first page was already written. I didn't remember writing it, but the pen was still warm. The ink, fresh. My own handwriting, but not my own thoughts. The page began. To begin again, you must forget the ending. I closed the book. Locked. It in a drawer, moved again. New city, new job, new routines. Normalcy became an addiction. I clung to it like a raft in a drowning storm. But some nights, I'd hear the drawer rattle, the sound of pages turning themselves, whispers beneath the threshold of hearing. And eventually, I opened it again. This time, it wasn't a book. It was a box. Identical dimensions, identical weight. But when I lifted the lid, nothing, just black, not empty, hungry. Something inside looked up, not with eyes, with memory. It remembered me and it laughed. I threw it away, burned it, buried the ashes. But the next morning, it was back. On my desk, open, waiting. That was when the messages started. Not on paper, not in voice, in time. Moments repeating, déjà vus stitched together with impossible precision. I'd walk past someone, and they'd freeze, for a frame, like reality. Glitched and then snap back. I'd hear footsteps behind me that never matched the number of people around. I'd wake up with sand in my mouth, always the same kind, from the canyon. And then the photo changed. The one on my wall, me and Matt's senior year beach trip. Only now he was looking at me, not smiling. Eyes empty, accusing. I turned it over, a new message scratched into the back. Did you forget already? I smashed the frame. Burned the photo, but it returned. Larger, framed in black wood I didn't own, placed on the ceiling above my bed. No one else could see it. Only me. I tried therapy. I told the truth, or a version of it. The therapist nodded, took notes, smiled. But when I left, I saw her again, standing outside the building. Only it wasn't her, just someone wearing her face. The smile didn't move, eyes didn't blink, and the note in my car read, "She remembers nothing, but she hears you." That night I tried to overdose. I just wanted silence. No more echoes, no more watchers. No, more versions, but I woke up in a hospital, empty room, only one visitor, Matt, or his shape. He sat by the window, didn't speak, just stared. I blinked, and he was gone. But the room was still cold, colder than any hospital should be, and the monitor beeped. Flatline. Though I was breathing, they checked. Machines confirmed I was alive, but I had no pulse, no rhythm, just movement, and they let me go, because how do you explain someone who's both living and not? I went home, to the newest home, and I waited. The book was gone. The box was gone. Even the canyon, when I returned, was gone, as if it had never existed. Locals denied it. The road ended too soon, just grass and silence. But I remembered, and memory, it turns out, is the true portal. So I wrote it down, all of it, again. Not to escape, to trap it, bind it in words, make it readable. And when I finished, the paper bled, tiny drops read still warm, the letters rearranged, new title, Volume 3, and a question beneath it. Do you want to know how it ends? I didn't answer. I won't answer, because I've learned something. Stories don't end when you stop reading them. They end when they forget you, and I don't think this one ever will. The year was nearing its halfway mark, somewhere around mid-2018. I was 23, and after what felt like a long stretch away, I'd driven back to Vermont to spend some time with family and catch a breath from the hectic pace of life. My parents' house was nestled just beyond the reach of the Appalachian Mountains. I knew that place like the lines on my palm. When I still lived under that roof, I'd wander into those woods, almost like clockwork, hiking, exploring, escaping. But ever since I moved out, I hadn't felt that same freedom. Life just didn't leave room for it. But there was one place that had refused to fade from my memory. Right before I left Vermont the first time, I came across a post on a forum. It was one of those deep dive communities for urban explorers and lovers of abandoned architecture. The post described a trail, not an official one, mind you, that supposedly led to a forgotten lodge swallowed up by the forest. No signs, no maintenance, just obscurity. And I couldn't shake the thought of it. So on a Monday morning, I loaded my gear and drove out. The road leading there had no proper parking, so I just pulled over onto the shoulder. The trailhead wasn't marked at all, no signs, no clear indication, only a faint, overgrown pathway pushing into the trees. It was obvious this wasn't an area that saw much foot traffic anymore. Nature had been reclaiming it slowly, greedily. It took nearly 2 hours to make the full hike. The terrain wasn't exactly rugged, but the sheer thickness of brush and twisted branches made it harder than it needed to be. Still, I pressed on until I reached it, and there it was, half devoured by time. The roof had given in to gravity, caved in on itself like an exhausted breath. The wood structure, once proud, now sat bloated with rot and overrun with tangled vines. It reeked of decay and wetness, and the air around it felt thick. Still, I had come prepared. I'd brought a tent and gear in case the interior was too far, gone to sleep in. And thank God I did. One look inside told me everything I needed to know. While the doorway stood open like a gaping mouth, the inside was a disaster. Mold clung to the walls like a living thing. Broken beams lay where the ceiling had collapsed. The floor groaned with every shift of weight. I could see a hallway leading deeper into the structure, with a single door still closed on the far end, oddly untouched. Part of me wanted to reach it, open it, find out what was hidden there. But the risk of walking across the unstable remains kept me from doing so. I pulled back. No point pushing it. The sun had already begun its slow descent, so I moved about 200 feet away from the structure, cleared out a patch of ground, and pitched my tent. From where I sat, I could still glimpse the skeleton of the lodge, just barely. As daylight slipped behind the treetops, the silhouette of the building dissolved into darkness. Crickets began to chirp. My campfire popped and cracked, providing the only light and sound against the encroaching night. I wanted to watch the stars. That was part of the plan. But the canopy above blocked most of the sky and clouds rolled through in slow, lazy bunches. So instead, I just sat, throwing small sticks into the flames, letting my mind wander. That's when I heard it. A single noise. Not subtle, not the usual whispers of wind or wildlife. It sounded like wood straining, bending, or maybe a heavy weight shifting. And I knew, even in the dark, where that sound came from. It was the lodge. The exact spot where I knew the crumbling ruin sat hidden in the shadows. It lasted only a moment. The sound cut off, but it carried something with it, an uneasiness that settled deep in my chest. I sat motionless for a long while. 30 minutes, maybe, waiting, listening, but nothing followed, just the same forest lullaby of insects and burning wood. And yet, I couldn't let it go. My brain needed resolution, needed to confirm it was just old timber giving way, nothing more. I knew. If I didn't go look now, I wouldn't sleep. So I left the fire burning low and grabbed my lantern. My steps were slow, cautious. Within a minute, the dim outline of the lodge crept back into view. My beam of light landed on the same door I'd left open earlier. Only now, it wasn't. The door had been shut. I blinked, confused. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I never left it. Open after all. But as I approached, another detail made my stomach twist. The wood on the front of the door was marked, deeply, by what looked like claw marks or the tip of a blade. Lines dug into the grain, haphazard and sharp. I couldn't remember seeing those before I reached out. Turned the handle. It didn't budge. Something resisted from the other side, like an unseen weight anchoring it shut. I stood there for several seconds, frozen, before retreating a few steps. Then I turned and made my way back into the woods, walking, faster than before. When I returned to the camp, I expected to see the warm glow of my fire, but the clearing was dark. No light, no crackle, just a pillar of smoke rising into the canopy, like someone had doused it the moment I walked away. I held my lantern higher, scanning the trees. Hello? Silence. Who's out there? Nothing. I stood still, every muscle taut. It was only a 2-hour hike back to my car. I could make it if I moved quickly. I took down the tent with shaking hands, stuffing it hastily into my pack. But then I heard something again. Not a snap, not a step. Laughter. Soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. It wasn't joyful, it was the kind of laughter that curls your blood. Slow, measured, the kind someone might let slip when watching you in secret. I couldn't tell where it came from, just that it was close. Very close. I didn't wait any longer. I grabbed my pack, ditched what I couldn't carry, and sprinted. The trail was hard to follow with only the weak beam of my lantern, but instinct took over. Several times I stopped, certain I heard that same twisted laugh just behind me, but I never saw anyone. Eventually the trees gave way. The road came into view. I dove into my car, slammed the door, and drove. Only once I was halfway home did I feel like I could breathe again. 7 years have passed, but that night has never left me. Not really. There's a helplessness in being out there in the woods alone, when something is watching you. When you know without a doubt that you're not alone and whatever is with you doesn't want you there. Whatever lives in that lodge or uses it, I don't think it's worth investigating. I don't think anyone should ever try to find out. It was during the following summer when something else happened, something I'll never be able to unsee. I had returned to my usual routines and continued camping here and there. Nothing unusual had occurred for a while. That feeling of paranoia I had in Vermont had started to dull, buried under more normal experiences. I guess I let my guard down again. This trip was supposed to be simple. I was headed back to a trail I'd visited a few times before, a quiet, remote spot where I could let my dog, Rocky, roam around without worrying about running into people or their animals. He was an Australian shepherd, smart as hell, full of energy, and always ready to hike right alongside me. The trail was long, about 8 hours in. By the time we arrived at the familiar clearing, It was already late afternoon. There was nothing particularly beautiful about the sight, no grand view or rushing stream nearby, just a small open patch in the forest surrounded by dense woods. But I liked that. It was isolated, peaceful. Rocky usually loved it too. As always, when we arrived, he trotted off to sniff the perimeter and do his little patrol while I started setting up the tent. But this time, something was off. Only 15 minutes after we got there, Rocky returned to my side, walking slowly, with his tail lowered. He pressed up against my leg and then sat down facing the woods, staring into the trees like he was watching something I couldn't see. That wasn't normal. Not for him. He only ever acted like that during storms or when something was truly bothering him. I checked him over, thinking maybe he'd stepped on something or gotten bit, but there wasn't a scratch on him. Physically, he was fine, but his body was tense and his eyes never left the same patch of trees. That unsettled me. I continued, setting up the campsite, but I could feel my thoughts spiraling. Rocky followed me around the entire time, never going more than a few feet from where I stood. That was the second red flag. Normally, he'd wander a bit, chase insects, roll in the dirt. Not tonight. Tonight, he was guarding me. That realization made the hairs on my arms stand straight. I told myself it was probably just a raccoon, or maybe even a fox wandering nearby. But I couldn't shake the tension that had lodged itself in my chest. As the sun dropped behind the trees, the clearing was swallowed in shadow. I got the fire going, trying to bring some warmth into the cold tightness that had settled over the area. The night sounds eventually returned, chirps, the crackle of wood, the rustling of leaves far off in the distance. I tried to relax. I told myself that animals come and go. Rocky was probably just picking up on a scent I couldn't. But then, just after the last traces of light disappeared from the sky, Rocky jolted upright and froze again. He stared, completely still, into the black void beyond the firelight. His body trembled slightly. His ears were up, but his tail tucked hard between his legs. A soft whine escaped him. I stood immediately, grabbing the flashlight. I scanned the trees. Nothing. The beam stretched into the dark, swallowed quickly by the forest. I walked out just a few steps, Rocky moving close to my heels. I felt like I was trespassing, even though I'd been there all day. The forest, once mine to explore, now felt like someone else's territory. I didn't go far, maybe 50 feet, before I gave up and came back. Whatever was out there wasn't going to reveal itself. And maybe that was for the best. I told myself it had to be a deer. Rocky settled slightly as we returned to the fire, but his eyes never relaxed. Not once that night did he turn his back to the woods. Eventually, we crawled into the tent. He curled up tightly beside me, pressing against my side. Even asleep. I could feel his muscles twitch with every sound outside. Somehow I drifted off too. That's when the dream began. I was walking, alone, through the forest. No path, no purpose, just wandering between trees beneath the cover of night. The air was thick, still. My footsteps made no sound. And then I heard it. A high-pitched whine repeating over and over, echoing in the silence. My ears strained, searching. It grew louder, sharper, almost metallic, and then I woke up. Rocky was whining. Not quietly. He was nudging me aggressively, his snout pressing against my cheek, his breath fast and warm against my skin. I sat up, heart thundering. His eyes were wide, fearful, his ears flattened back. I reached for my flashlight, unzipped the tent, and stepped out into the dark. What the beam revealed was a memory I wish I could erase. 10 feet in front of me stood a man, not a hunter, not another camper. A man dressed in dark, ragged clothes, a hood drawn low over his head, his face mostly hidden, except for the scruff of an unkempt beard and his twisted expression. In his hand, caught in the light, was a glint of metal, a knife, small but deadly. We locked eyes. I didn't breathe. Neither did he. Then he moved, stepped forward, and my body finally responded. I stumbled back, Rocky instantly moving between us. His growl was low and guttural, a sound I'd never heard from him before. The stranger paused. He looked at Rocky, then at me. He took another step. I dove into the tent and came out with the bear spray gripping it tight. Rocky was already barking, loud and furious, his body bouncing back and forth in front of me. The man hesitated again. He didn't speak. He didn't threaten. He just stood there staring with this hollow, empty smile before suddenly turning and disappearing into the trees. I didn't waste time. I threw everything I could into my pack, leaving behind what I couldn't carry. Rocky kept circling me as I worked, keeping his head high and alert. Then we were gone, moving fast down the trail. The adrenaline made the miles blur. I didn't feel tired. I didn't even feel scared anymore. I felt focused, alive, and safe because of Rocky. We made it out. I reported what happened, but nothing ever came of it. No one found anything. No one looked too hard either. We've gone camping since. Rocky returned to his joyful, energetic self. But I never forgot that night. And now, when Rocky freezes or stares into the dark, I listen, because I know what it means. It was late autumn when the last incident happened, just before the snow began to take over the higher altitudes of Montana. I'd set my sights on a fairly well-known trail just outside Glacier National Park. It wasn't within the park itself, which meant there were no regulations, no fees, no crowds, just wilderness. This time of year, the place was practically abandoned. Most people had long packed away their gear for the winter, but the cold didn't bother me. In fact, I preferred it that way. The hike took nearly 6 hours. By the time I reached the summit, it was around 5:30. The top of the trail opened up into a wide clearing, a grassy plateau dotted with fire rings made from stones, and a few natural windbreaks formed by the surrounding trees. At the far edge of the space, a rocky outcrop jutted out like the edge of the world, offering a sweeping view of the forest below and the endless ridges beyond. On a clear day, you could probably catch a glimpse of Glacier National Park in the distance. No one else was up there. I picked the fire ring closest to the overlook and began setting up my tent. I cooked a quick meal using my portable stove and then walked out to the cliff to catch the sunset. The drop beyond the ledge was steep, hundreds of feet straight down, but the view made me forget all of that. The sun melted into the horizon, painting the valley in warm golds and deep shadows. For 30 full minutes I just sat there, letting the silence wrap around me. Then I stood, stretched, and turned to head back to my tent. And that's when I saw him, a figure, half hidden in the bushes where the trees began again. He wasn't close, maybe 30 feet off, but he was clearly watching me. Just standing there, no movement, no reaction. His face was hard to make out in the fading light, but I could see enough to know he didn't have a pack, no gear, no flashlight, no jacket. As soon as our eyes met, he turned and walked away, vanishing into the trees without a sound. I froze for a few seconds, unsure what to do. Was he just passing through? Another camper? A hiker heading back down? But then I remembered. There were no other campsites nearby. And if he'd come up the same trail as me, I would have seen or heard something. Plus, it was getting dark. No one hikes back down after sunset. Not up here. I went back to my tent, uneasy. I walked a full loop around the clearing, checking for signs of another campsite. Nothing. No other tents. No tracks. No gear. Just me. I lit the fire in the stone ring and sat down in my camping chair, trying to shake it off. Maybe he was just curious. Maybe he was on his way to the overlook and saw me and decided not to bother. But none of it made sense. The way he'd looked at me, there was something unnatural about how still he was, how quickly he disappeared. Hours passed. By 11, I was still wide awake, staring into the fire. I hadn't moved. I hadn't even tried getting into the tent. I was just sitting there, waiting for something I couldn't name. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, deliberate, measured, human. They came from the trees in front of me, right where that man had disappeared earlier. I called out, asking if someone was there. The steps paused, then started again. Still no answer. The firelight barely reached the edge of the woods, and everything beyond it was pitch black. I stared into the dark for what felt like an hour, but the sound eventually stopped. Not abruptly, just faded, like whoever or whatever was out there had moved away. I stayed by the fire, too alert to sleep. Midnight came and went. I figured I'd check the overlook again. Maybe the stars had come out. Maybe some fresh air would help clear my mind. I walked out to the cliff's edge, away from the light of the fire, and looked out. The sky was overcast, but the moon was bright enough to cast silver across the treetops and ridges. It was quiet, beautiful, in a way that only solitude can be. But then I heard it again. Branches snapping behind me, a bush thrashing violently. Spun around and there he was, the same man from before, but this time he didn't vanish. He stepped forward, quickly, and as he did, I saw something in his eyes. Not confusion, not recognition, hunger. His smile was wide and forced, teeth clenched, as he mumbled unintelligible words beneath his breath. I tried asking what he wanted, who he was, but he talked over me, kept moving closer. His speech was nonsense, gibberish laced with something darker, something broken. I stepped to the side. He mirrored me. Then he lunged, hands outstretched, aiming straight for my chest. He tried to push me over the edge. I caught myself. My boots were planted and I was heavier than him. I shoved back with all I had, sending him stumbling away from the cliff. I bolted, racing back toward my camp. But I didn't get far before he caught up again. His hands clawed at me, his face contorted with rage. He wasn't just trying to scare me, he wanted to kill me. We fought, rolled through the dirt. My fingers scraped against rocks as I tried to hold him off. He didn't speak anymore, just growled, feral, inhuman. But he was weak, thin, malnourished. I managed to get on top of him and drove my elbow into his ribs. He wheezed, then coughed and stumbled to his feet, and ran. He didn't look back, just disappeared into the forest, the same way he came. I didn't waste a second. I packed what I could, ripped the tent stakes from the ground, shoved it into my bag, half collapsed, and threw my gear over one shoulder. I flipped on my headlamp and started the long walk back down the trail. 2 hours later, the batteries died. I stopped in the darkness, heart pounding, and made a choice. I pitched a quick shelter off the trail and waited, sitting upright with my knife in one hand and bear spray in the other. The forest never moved again that night. When the sun rose, I finished the hike, legs sore and mind unraveling. I reported what happened, spoke with rangers. They asked questions, took notes, but nothing came of it. No one knew who he was, no signs, no tracks, no answers. I've thought about him every day since. The man with no gear, no words, no reason, just rage, and a smile too wide to be real. I don't know what compels someone to wander into the wilderness like that, without food, without gear, without even the intent to survive. But whatever that man was doing out there, it wasn't by accident. He didn't stumble upon me. He was looking for someone, or something to release whatever was boiling under his skin. I haven't stopped camping, haven't stopped hiking. The silence of the forest still calls to me. But the way I move through it now, how I sleep, how I listen, it's different. Every snapped twig echoes longer. Every breeze seems to whisper. Every shadow, deeper. Sometimes I think back to the first incident. That ruined lodge hidden deep in Vermont. The one that was too far gone to stand but somehow still existed. I remember the creak of rotting wood and that strange resistance when I tried to open the door that had shut itself. The scratches carved deep into its surface like warnings. I remember the laughter, soft and strange, coming from the trees. Laughter that had no warmth. I've asked myself 1,000 times, was it the same man? Of course not. They were years and states apart, different details, different dangers. But the feeling, the dread, the unnatural sense that I wasn't alone, that something was watching me. It was the same. Like the woods had changed from a place of peace to a hunting ground. Like something out there had learned how to wait. I keep journals now. After each trip, I write everything down. Every detail, every sound, every gut feeling. Not for evidence, not for sharing, just for me. It's the only way I can keep track of what's real and what's memory, because the more time passes, the harder it gets to separate them. Fear has a way of stitching itself into your perception until everything you see looks like a warning. One entry still haunts me, a trip I almost forgot. One I didn't even write about at the time because I convinced myself it hadn't mattered. It was the year after Vermont, and I was traveling through Colorado, hopping between small trails and forgotten lookouts. I found one on an old map, nothing marked officially, but a faint line cutting through the woods toward a place labeled Switchback Hollow. Sounded like nothing, but I was curious. I followed the trail for hours, deeper than I should have, past places where the trees grew so dense they blocked out most of the light. Eventually, I reached a clearing. It was circular, perfectly so. And in the center, just a stump. No ruins, no markings. No view, just a stump. Rocky was with me on that trip. He'd stayed calm the entire way. But the moment we entered that clearing, he stopped. His tail went down, his body stiffened, and he wouldn't move. Not forward, not back, just froze. I tried, calling him, offering treats. Nothing worked. So I turned back. We left without stepping foot inside the circle. Later that night, while lying in the tent, I heard something outside. A scraping sound, then laughter. Not loud, not even fully human, like someone trying to remember how to laugh. I didn't check. I didn't move. I stayed there until morning, then left without looking back, and I never wrote about it until now. Because that laughter, it was the same. The same sound I'd heard in Vermont, the same cadence, the same distance, like whatever had stood in the dark behind those trees was now following me, or had always been with me, and maybe that's the scariest part. Not that someone is out there, but that something is. A thing that waits, that wanders, that wears different faces. Sometimes a man in a hood, sometimes a figure in the woods, sometimes just footsteps in the night. It changes, adapts. But the presence, that never shifts. And if I'm honest with myself, I think it's always been there. Maybe the first time I heard it wasn't in Vermont. Maybe it was years earlier, just faint enough for me to brush off. A branch snapping too cleanly, a breath that wasn't mine, the feeling of being watched while thinking I was alone. People love to say the woods are healing, that nature restores. And they're not wrong, but they forget something important. Before we built cities, before we gave names to mountains and trails, the forest was something else entirely. It was wild, sacred, untouched, and unknowable. We walked into it carefully, humbly, because we knew what waited. There wasn't always kind, we just forgot, and I think it remembers. Sometimes late at night, I still hear that laugh. Not outside, no, not anymore. Now it's internal, echoing through the back of my mind like a memory that doesn't belong to me. A noise I can't forget, because it wasn't just sound. It was presence. It was intent. It was something looking through me rather than at me. The last time I went out alone was this past spring. I didn't plan it. It just sort of happened. I had been driving west, chasing a stretch of empty highway with no cell service, no signs, and no expectations. The land out there was open and vast, the kind that swallows you if you don't keep your bearings straight. I pulled off near a dirt road leading into a broken patch of forest. No name, no trail markers. But something about it pulled me in. Maybe I should have known. I parked, packed light, and started walking. The trees weren't thick like Vermont or Colorado. They stood far apart, thin and dry. Dead branches cracked beneath my feet as I made my way further in. The wind was constant but quiet, more like a whisper than a force. I walked until I found a depression in the earth, a sunken bowl of land with a few flat stones scattered across it, like someone had once tried to build something there but gave up halfway through. I set up camp, just me, a fire pit, and the stars above. As night came, I noticed something strange. The wind had stopped, completely. The trees no longer swayed. The air didn't move. Even the fire's smoke rose in a single straight column, as if frozen. And then I saw it, a figure barely visible at the tree line. Not moving, just standing, there. Arms at its sides, head tilted just slightly too far. I stood up, called out. No answer. I took a step forward, but the firelight didn't follow. The edge of the pit was like a boundary I couldn't cross, so I waited. It didn't move, didn't vanish. Just stood there for hours, motionless, while I sat and stared, too afraid to blink. Sometime after midnight, I fell asleep. Somehow. The fear had worn me down to exhaustion. But I woke just before sunrise. The fire had died, the wind returned, and the figure was gone. There were no tracks, no broken twigs, nothing, but my gear had been touched. The zipper on my pack was open. My knife had been moved, placed beside the fire pit. My boots had been turned around, pointing away from the site. I packed in silence. I didn't eat, didn't drink, just left. And I haven't gone back since. There are stories people tell about the woods, old ones, myths, legends. They speak of spirits, of watchers, of lost souls doomed to wander. We think they're metaphors, cautionary tales. But what if they're not? What if those stories were just ways to give shape to something too terrible to describe? Something that wears human faces, that waits for silence, that steps into your life when you think you're alone. I've lived through things that don't make sense, heard things that shouldn't exist, seen eyes that didn't reflect light. And no matter how many miles I hike, how many mountains I climb, it's always there, just behind me, just out of view. I've stopped telling people these stories. They nod. They say they understand. But I see it in their eyes. They don't believe me. Maybe they shouldn't. Maybe the truth is too ugly, but I know what I saw, what I heard, and I know one day it'll come close again, closer than ever. It was a Monday night, the kind that dragged a quiet kind of weight behind it. I just finished a late shift, clocking out of work at 8 and heading straight home. Not because I had anything pressing to do, but because there was nowhere else to be. Life had gotten quieter lately. My divorce had been finalized just a few months prior, and in the silence that followed, all that remained was the dull routine of my job and the flicker of a computer screen at night. Gaming with my friends had become my ritual, the one thing that reminded me there were still voices out there that knew me. That night was no different. I logged on, slipped on my headset, and settled into the familiar chaos of shouting teammates and digital gunfire. Outside, the weather had begun to churn. We'd been warned all day that a big thunderstorm was rolling in, with threats of flash flooding and high winds. But those kinds of warnings came and went often in our area, rarely amounting to anything more than a heavy drizzle. So, like always, I ignored them. But around 11, something changed. Midway through a match, a gust of wind hit the side of the house like a truck. The windows rattled violently, and for a split second I thought something had slammed into the siding. I tore my headset halfway off, glancing toward the window just in time to hear the house creak, sway slightly, and settle with a long groaning exhale. Rain began pouring down like a waterfall, hammering the roof with unrelenting force. I turned back to tell my friends what had just happened when everything went dark. The monitor cut out, lights flicked, then returned, just for a moment. I was still connected to the Discord call, barely. "Can you guys still hear me?" I asked, already feeling the tension knotting in my chest. Before anyone could respond, the power snapped off completely. Everything went dead. No screen, no hum. Just a suffocating blackness that devoured the room. I couldn't even see my own hands. I groped around the desk, fingers brushing over cables and empty mugs until I found my phone. Its screen lit the space weakly, casting long shadows over my walls. Annoyed, I got up and started making my way downstairs, every step creaking louder than usual in the silence. When I reached the front window, the storm blurred everything outside. Street lights were drowned in rain, and the houses across the street looked quiet, too quiet. It was hard to say whether anyone else had lost power. Most people were probably asleep by now anyway. I sent a quick message in the group chat, letting them know I was out for the night. Then I grabbed the phone's flashlight and made my way down into the basement. That room always had a strange kind of coldness to it, like the air there belonged to something older. Dust clung to every box, and the smell of concrete and damp wood lingered like a bad memory. I found the old battery bank tucked behind some shelves. It wasn't anything fancy, just enough to get a few lamps going. I hoisted it up, turned to leave, and paused. A sound, barely anything, but enough. Something behind me shifted. I turned, shining the light across stacked storage bins and piles of forgotten junk. Nothing moved, just the storm outside shaking the windows above. I brushed it off. The wind, probably, just the wind. Back upstairs, I plugged a lamp into the battery and let the warm light fill the living room. I dropped onto the couch. The thing is, I hate sleeping with no power. I don't know why, but the thought of lying in the dark with no hum of electricity makes me restless. So I sat there, blinds open, watching the storm crash against the world. An hour passed. I kept myself busy on my phone, using data to scroll through YouTube. Then, curiosity got the better of me. I stood, unlocked the front door, and stepped onto the porch. The overhang shielded me from the worst of the rain, though the wind still whipped cold droplets against my face. I looked around. The storm hadn't let up, but across the street a few windows glowed with faint yellow light. Strange, they still had power. Confused, I checked my phone. No outage reports in the area, no service notices, just a storm warning from earlier. Then, out of nowhere, a text, unknown number. The message read, "Power outage in your area due to downed lines. Please stay indoors and expect delays." But the number didn't belong to any official alert system. No company ID, just a standard 10-digit number. It felt wrong. I stared at the message for a while before going back inside. I tried to push the unease down, chalking it up to some weird glitch or maybe a forwarded alert from a friend, but something kept tugging at my nerves. I dropped back onto the couch, watching the storm, listening to the thunder roll. Then came the sound that froze me in place, a footstep, faint, distant, but unmistakable. I knew that creak. The basement stairs. I'd lived here long enough to recognize that exact sound of weight pressing down on the third step from the bottom. My breath caught. I stood slowly, phone light trembling in my hand. I moved toward the hallway, careful not to make a sound. I turned the corner and shined the light down the hall. The basement door was wide open. I never leave it like that. The light barely reached the bottom of the stairs, and there was nothing visible, just the yawning darkness below. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then I shut the door, and that should have been the end of it. But as I turned to walk away, I heard it again. Not a single step this time. A barrage. Heavy footsteps thundering up the stairs behind the closed door, each one louder than the last, shaking the frame. I reacted on instinct. I rushed forward and slammed my body against the door just as it rocked under the weight of something. On the other side. Something or someone trying to force their way up. The door shuddered, wood strained. There was no lock, nothing to hold it but me. They hit it again. And again. I fumbled for my phone, hands slick with sweat, and started dialing 911. But the moment I did, the pounding stopped. Silence. Then footsteps descending again, slowly, methodically. I didn't wait. I bolted for the front door. Rain and wind be damned. I threw myself into the car, started the engine, and reversed out of the driveway in a panic. I parked across the street, hidden behind a tree line, eyes locked on my house. 10 minutes passed. No one came out. When the police arrived, 3 officers went inside. They swept the house from top to bottom. Nobody was there. Whoever had broken in was gone. They'd used the back door to leave, but the most disturbing part wasn't the break-in. It wasn't the noise or the footsteps. It was the text. The one warning. Me about the power outage. It wasn't sent by a utility company. It was from a personal number. Someone had watched me, knew when I'd go outside, knew how I'd react, knew how to keep me from going into the basement and flipping the breaker back on. There was no outage. He had turned off the power himself. That was as far as the investigation ever went. The guy was gone like smoke. No fingerprints, no signs of forced entry on the back door. Just the open basement, a power switch manually thrown, and a chilling absence of any logical reason for how he got my number, or why he knew to use it. For weeks I didn't sleep right. The creak of any old wood made my skin crawl. Every buzz of my phone sent adrenaline through my system. I moved out 2 months later. You'd think I would have stayed away from anything isolated after that, but I didn't. It was a mix of stubbornness and a need to not feel hunted by fear. That's how I ended up on another trip, this time camping with my best friend Henry. We'd been talking about doing something more real, not the kind of camping where you have bathrooms nearby or other families around. We wanted isolation, views, That feeling of being swallowed by the forest with nothing but our gear and our instincts to keep us alive. So we picked a spot about 3 hours from home, one that took another 4 hours hiking deep into the woods to reach. It was one of those places passed along by word of mouth more than websites. Only a couple of blurry photos existed online, and that just made it more appealing to us. If nobody went out there, it meant it hadn't been ruined by foot traffic or trash. It meant the wilderness was still real. We loaded up for 3 days, drove out early, and reached the trailhead. The road ended in a patch of uneven dirt that barely counted, as a lot. No other cars, no signs of life. The trail itself started off looking like it had once been official, wide enough, vaguely marked, but neglected. As we progressed, it narrowed. Vines crossed it. Fallen branches blocked paths. In some areas, the forest had just claimed the path entirely, forcing us to guess where to go next. But we found it. The site. A quiet, grassy hill with a stunning view of the treetops stretching out for miles. No signs of other campers. No footprints, just us and the forest. Henry started pitching his tent, and I wandered over to the overlook. The wind was calm. The forest alive beneath us with distant sounds of birds and leaves rustling in slow waves. Then something moved, down below, between the trees. People. At first I thought I imagined it, but I saw them again. 4 or 5 dark silhouettes slipping between branches. No gear, no lights, just figures moving like shadows over dirt. I called for Henry. By the time he walked over, they were gone. He thought I was seeing things, and I started to believe it too. The rest of the afternoon passed like any other. We built a small fire, unpacked some food, talked about work, about nothing. For a while it felt normal, even fun. But as the sun dropped, a different kind of quiet settled over us. The kind that feels too thick, too intentional. Then came the voices, distant, faint, but undeniably human. They drifted in through the trees, like whispers on a breeze. Soft, unintelligible, murmurs like a group of people standing just out of sight. I froze, so did Henry. We both leaned forward, listening. We couldn't make out the words, couldn't even tell if it was English. But it wasn't just one person. There were several, and then they stopped. Not like they wandered away, not like they got quiet. Just stopped, like they were still out there, listening now, instead of speaking. A single set of footsteps followed, crunching leaves, breaking twigs, growing louder. Then a man stepped into the edge of the firelight. He looked almost normal. Jeans, hiking boots, red baseball cap, long, dark, messy hair. His face carried the kind of smile that was too wide for the moment. "Either of you guys know where the trail is around here?" he asked, casual as if he'd just dropped his keys. I nodded and pointed. "Yeah, it's that way." He didn't. "Hoove, are the others with you?" I added. His smile vanished for a split second, then returned. "What others?" He glanced behind him. "I've just been hiking alone. Haven't seen anyone else." But I'd seen them, in the same direction he'd come from. And the voices, they'd come from there too. Still, I just said okay and stepped back. He thanked us, nodded, and walked down the trail. Henry and I didn't speak until we couldn't hear his footsteps anymore. "He was lying," Henry finally said. I nodded. There was no question. He'd seen them. He came from where the voices were. And yet, he'd pretended. They didn't exist. Why? That was the question that chilled us. Why lie? What was he hiding? What were they hiding? We sat in silence for a long time after that, the fire burning lower as our nerves burned higher. The forest had become a stranger. Every tree a hiding place, every branch a watching eye. "Should we just leave?" Henry asked finally. I wanted to say no. I wanted to be brave. But I couldn't lie to him, or myself. "Yeah," I said. We packed. Fast, every second felt slower, heavier. Like something was watching us and growing more excited the closer we got to leaving. The moment we doused the fire, a single footstep echoed behind me, loud and close. We spun. Nothing but dark trees. Reached for my flashlight, pulled it from my bag and clicked it on, and there he was, the same man, red cap, that same hollow smile, standing maybe 15 feet away, unmoving, unblinking, just staring. I turned off the light. We ran. I don't remember much of the trail, just roots catching my boots and branches cutting my arms as we tore through the dark. Behind us, footsteps. Many. Surrounding us, in the trees, on the trail, but none ever caught up. Eventually, it was just Henry and me again, panting, sweating, alive. We reached the car, locked the doors, and drove until we couldn't see the forest anymore. We never went back. We never even talked about trying. Whatever that place was, whoever those people were, they didn't want to be seen and they didn't want us to leave. But we did. Barely. It had been months since the camping trip with Henry, but that image of the man in the red cap standing in the darkness with that unnatural grin never really left my mind. It resurfaced during moments of quiet, when I was alone at night or walking down empty hallways. Sometimes I thought I could hear the faint crack of twigs underfoot behind me, the echo of a smile I never really understood. But I kept moving forward, trying to pretend the world made sense again. It was spring of 2021 when the next event happened, and this one didn't start in the forest or deep in the night. It began with a road trip. I was 24, at the time, driving home for spring break from an out-of-state college where I had been living for the past year. The distance between my dorm and my hometown was almost 2 full days of driving, most of it long stretches of asphalt cutting, through nothingness. Still, I preferred it to flying. Something about being in control of your route, seeing where you're going inch by inch, always gave me a strange sense of comfort. I left on a Tuesday, earlier than planned. I'd woken up before sunrise with that particular energy that comes from anticipation mixed with just enough caffeine. The road was quiet, the sky gray. I drove almost 10 hours straight with only short stops for gas and food. Around 8 in the evening, I decided it was time to find a place to sleep. I wasn't too picky. Just a bed and a locked door would be enough. I pulled into a gas station and, using their Wi-Fi, found a nearby hotel. It wasn't far, maybe. Another 15 minutes down a back road that ran behind the station, veering away from the main highway and into a smaller, forgotten-looking town. The road itself felt old, the pavement cracked and dotted with potholes that hadn't been filled in decades. Streetlights stood like skeletons, too dim to pierce the darkness. I didn't pass another car the entire way. The town looked frozen in time. Low, crumbling buildings with boarded windows and peeling paint, the kind of place people drive through without ever stopping. At the very end of the street was the hotel, a small 2-story structure with a weather-worn sign out front. I pulled into the empty lot, grabbed my duffel bag from the back seat and headed inside. The lobby was lit, technically, but not enough to feel welcoming. The light buzzed with a low hum, casting more shadow than clarity. No one was at the front desk. I waited. The silence pressed in like humidity. Then I heard footsteps, soft, slow, and a woman appeared from a hallway behind the counter. She looked startled to see me, like she hadn't expected anyone to show up tonight. Her smile was polite, rehearsed. She handed me a key card without asking much, told me my room was the last one at the end of the hall. I thanked her and made my way down the corridor. The room was small, outdated, the kind of place that smelled like time had pooled in the carpet. Still, I was too tired to care. I dropped onto the couch and pulled out my phone, falling into the hypnotic scroll of random videos. I must have passed out like that, the weight of the drive finally catching up with me. Then came the knocking. It wasn't subtle. 3 heavy thuds against the door. I sat bolt upright, my heart already pounding. The clock on the wall read 11 p.m. I walked cautiously to the door, peeked out the peephole. Nothing. I opened the door. Empty hallway. Not a sound. I stepped out, looked both directions. Silence. I waited a minute, maybe longer, expecting someone to reappear from around a corner or to hear footsteps walking away. Nothing. I closed the door slightly, unnerved. Maybe it had been a mistake. Wrong room. Kids playing around, some kind of prank. I sat back down, tried to relax. Eventually got up to shower, then climbed into bed. I set my alarm for 8 a.m., shut off the lights and let the room drift into silence. Somewhere in the pitch-black hours that followed, it happened again. This time louder. The knocking was urgent, almost frantic. I was on my feet before I was even fully awake. I rushed to the door, adrenaline already spiking. Again, no one there. The hallway was silent, still and dim. I stood there longer this time, waiting to catch someone in the act. But again, nothing. I decided I'd had enough. I made my way to the lobby, barefoot, still groggy. The same woman was at the desk. She looked up, startled again. I told her what had happened. Her expression shifted slowly from confusion to something else, discomfort. "You're the only guest staying here tonight," she said flatly. I waited for a laugh. Some hint of a joke. There was none. I walked back down the hallway in silence. My footsteps suddenly seemed louder than they should be, echoing against the faded wallpaper and cheap carpet. I reached my room and closed the door with care, sliding every lock into place. Then I turned off the lights and sat on the edge of the bed, waiting. The room was dark, not just dim, but void, like light had never touched the corners. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, planning to play some video to drown out the tension, maybe even distract myself long enough to fall asleep. But the second the screen lit up, I saw it. A figure, standing in the corner of the room, in the dark, just watching. I couldn't scream. My body wouldn't let me. My limbs locked as if frozen. The silhouette didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there, a shadow made real. I bolted for the door, yanking locks free with trembling hands. Behind me I heard footsteps, a sprint, loud and violent, racing straight toward me. The moment I flung the door open, I felt air shift at my back. I ran, barefoot, heart thundering against my ribs. The woman at the front desk looked up, eyes wide with horror, not at me but at what was behind me. She reached for the phone. The figure burst into the lobby, then immediately turned and ran, not out to a car, not toward another room, just out, into the dark. Vanished into the night without looking back. The woman told the police she had no idea who the man was. She confirmed again that I was the only person checked in. No other rooms were occupied. Only one key had been issued that night. The security footage showed him entering the lobby behind me. But nothing else. No sign of how he got in. No record of entry. No car. No second key. Somehow, while I had gone to report the knocks, he had slipped into my room. He had been waiting there in the dark, watching, and if I hadn't grabbed my phone when I did, if that faint blue light hadn't revealed him, I wouldn't have seen him until it was too late. I left that night. There was no discussion, no second guessing. I packed my bag with shaking hands, walked past the lobby without saying anything, and stepped back into the cold breath of that small town. I didn't sleep. I didn't stop driving, until the sky started to lighten behind me, and the shadows stretched thin across the road. Even then I didn't feel safe. The corners of my vision felt too full. Every car I passed could have held him. Every set of headlights felt like a stare. Bye, Mom. The time I got home, I felt like I'd lived several lifetimes in just a few days. I didn't tell my family much. Just that I was tired. Just that I needed a long shower and to sleep in a place where I didn't feel watched. But that sense of being hunted never quite left. It lingered in the way I checked every room before turning out the lights, how I left the television on just to hear something human in the room. It settled in the back of my mind like mold in the walls. I kept thinking about the knock, the timing, how it only happened when I was alone, how he got in without a key, how he was already in the room before I knew it, and worst of all, how long he'd been standing there watching, unmoving. If I hadn't turned on my phone, if I hadn't reached for the light, what would he have done? What did he want? No money had been taken. Nothing was stolen. The hotel staff confirmed later there was no sign of break-in, no signs of forced entry. The back door had been locked, the side entrances too. Security footage showed no arrival, no departure. The man had come and gone like fog. The only thing real was me and my fear. Weeks passed, then months, and life tried to drag me back into routine, but I didn't go on another trip. I didn't spend nights alone. I barely even closed my eyes without checking every lock twice. Something inside me had shifted. There's a point where fear stops being temporary and becomes a part of your wiring. It doesn't scream anymore. It just breathes with you, moves with you, waits with you in the dark. Then one night, late summer, I got a text, no name, no ID, just a message. Did you sleep well? I stared at it for what felt like hours. I never replied. I never blocked the number. I didn't even delete it. I just stared. I wanted to believe it wasn't him, that it was just some wrong number, a prank, some twisted joke from a friend who didn't understand the damage they were doing. But in my gut I knew it was him. It wasn't over. It was never over. I started researching. Patterns, stories, anything. Turns out, I'm not the only one. There are forums, threads, posts that get deleted faster than they go up. People describing the same things, figures in the dark, knocks with no source, doors that open on their own, strangers that vanish before police arrive. They all describe the same kind of person, a man who smiles too wide, who doesn't blink, who moves silently until he doesn't. Some think it's just urban legend, creepy stories to scare people online. But the ones who really know, that they don't post, they don't write, they don't talk about it anymore. And the ones who do, they go quiet. Eventually. Sometimes I wonder if this thing, this person, if you can even call him that, has always been around, watching, testing boundaries, picking people when they're alone, tired, weak. When no one else will believe them, it's never random. It always feels chosen. And once he sees you, once you've looked into those hollow eyes and felt the weight of that grin like a knife, just under your ribs, he never lets you go. I haven't been followed since, not that I can tell. But sometimes the lights flicker. Sometimes my phone rings once, then stops. Sometimes I dream of footsteps and wake up with my heart trying to break. Free from my chest, he isn't gone, he's just patient, waiting. And the next time I see him, I won't be able to run. Sometimes late at night when everything is quiet, I still find myself listening. Not for sounds, but for silence. The wrong kind of silence. The kind that presses into the room like a stranger's breath on your neck. The kind that doesn't just exist, but watches, waits, stretches out across the corners of your life and dares you to notice it. Because if you notice it, then you've acknowledged it. And once you acknowledge it, it becomes real. I've had years to think about it. And the one thing that keeps resurfacing is this. There was never a moment when it all started. There was no real beginning. Just a gradual realization that something was wrong. A string of moments that seemed isolated, disconnected until they weren't. Until they lined up in a way that made it obvious. It wasn't just the lodge in Vermont. It wasn't just the man in the woods. It wasn't just the red cap or the footsteps on the stairs or the silence in the hotel hallway. It was all of it and more. It's like a pattern that emerges only when you step back far enough. You don't see it while you're living it. You don't see the design in the chaos until you're already entangled in it. Maybe that's what he wants. Not to be seen until you can't unsee him. I used to think I was just unlucky, that I'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time more than once, that the world was chaotic and sometimes people were just monsters. But that's not it. It's worse than that, because monsters, you can fight. You can understand them, you can name them. But this thing, this presence, it doesn't belong to any rule we've made. It doesn't follow a pattern that makes sense. It doesn't need a reason. It just needs an opportunity. There are nights when I swear I see movement in places I've already checked. Reflections in glass that don't line up with anything in the room. My phone rings and the screen says no caller ID, but when I answer it's just breathing. Slow, measured, almost relaxed. I've stopped trying to prove it. No one believes you after a certain point. They nod, change the subject, or give. You that look, the one that says, you're not crazy, but let's not talk about this anymore. So I keep it to myself, all of it. Every door I double lock, every light I leave on, every piece of furniture I subtly rearrange to block doorways, every backup battery I keep in reach, every line I whisper under my breath at night like a prayer, even though I don't believe in anything anymore, because it doesn't matter if you believe only that he does. Some nights when I manage to sleep, I dream of being watched, not just followed, not just observed, but truly, intimately watched. Like something is peeling back my skin layer by layer, reading me, studying me, writing me down in its own language. I wake up with my mouth dry and the sheets soaked with sweat. I don't scream anymore. I just sit up and wait for the feeling to pass. It never does. It just goes quiet again, like he's reminding me that I'm still his. I've tried moving. I've tried staying with friends. I've tried sleeping in hotels, in motels, in cities so loud you can't hear your own thoughts. But it doesn't help. He doesn't need a place. He just needs me. And that's the hardest part to explain. It's not just that something terrifying happened to me. It's that something chose me and keeps choosing me. I know how this ends, not with some dramatic chase, not with a confrontation, not even with a scream, but with quiet, with a knock at a door I never locked, with footsteps that don't rush because there's no need to hurry anymore, with a breath in the dark, right next to mine, with a voice that doesn't speak words but still says everything, with a silence that finally answers all the questions I should have asked long ago, and maybe when that moment comes, I'll understand. But until then, I wait. Not because I want to, but because I have no other choice.